I would do it 100 times over again. The thing I would say that I want people to know is it comes with a lot of sacrifice, more than people realize. And you have a lot more control over that sacrifice than you might think. And where I don't want to necessarily say failed, but the choices that I made during that time caused me to sacrifice a lot of time with my family. It caused me to sacrifice a lot of other areas in order to gain something else. So there was give and take. I definitely gained something, so that sacrifice wasn't for nothing. And in the long run, it helped me, but it also hurt me in certain areas.
This episode is brought to you by Trident Coffee, a veteran-owned brand and lifestyle. And while they're masters of cold brew, Trident's beans are roasted to create a flavor that shines whether you drink it hot or cold. There's no bitterness, there's no burnt taste, it's just good tasting coffee. Their coffees taste amazing hot, which is how I prefer it, while still designed to excel as a cold brew. But Trident Coffee is more than just great taste. Trident supports your wellness journey, featuring ingredients like organic mushrooms, adaptogens, and nootropics. It's made for those who enjoy good coffee and value quality and health. So if you're looking for a coffee that meets you wherever your day takes you, hot or cold, you need to check out Trident Coffee. I know I said I prefer hot coffee, but here's a tip from me. Mix their instant cold brew with your favorite protein for a protein coffee drink that's great cold. You can thank me later. I know there's a lot of coffee options out there, but give Trident a try. I know you'll enjoy it as much as I do. Head over to tridentcoffee.com and use the promo code TDP15 for 15% off your order. That's TDP15 for 15% off your order. Hey everyone, welcome back. I've got a repeat guest again. This guest, though, is definitely somebody who I found him by accident, and he was one of the very early guests of the podcast. Had a very enjoyable conversation with him. Really kind of felt like I, in a weird way, connected with him. A little bit more about his background, though. Spent 15 years in the Marine Corps, was a member of MARSOC. Got out in 2021 because his wife's health was needing more attention and he needed to be home. In this episode, we talk a little bit more about his time in MARSOC, the MARSOC pipeline, and those experiences. But the other side that we talk about more is the impact that his time in the military, his time as a member of MARSOC, and what he allowed the perceived demands of that unit and that assignment to impact his family and the relationships that he had, but equally the work that he had to put in to rebuild those relationships with his family. When he got out of the Marine Corps, he started his company, Thrash and Raid. He talks about how that company ultimately failed and everything that he did to try to keep it afloat, and again, the subsequent impact that it had on his family. We talk about his work that he did creating social media, I'll loosely call them commercials. He ended up getting to work with companies like Black Rifle Coffee and Mac Belts, and very comedy-based ads and skits, and they're very funny to watch. And the one thing about him is that he'll say is that he has no problem making fun of or poking fun at himself. But at the same token, there is the serious side of him that a lot of people don't really know. He talks about how he's had to pivot, doing more work today in the executive protection field, as well as training with the company Defense Strategies Group that he's been working with now for several years and helping them grow. What really kind of caught me off guard was what he's thinking about for his long-term vision and where he might find himself down the road. But I'm going to leave that for you to hear in the episode. Again, he's a second-time guest. I encourage you to go back to episode 28 to get more of his early life journey and his journey into the Marine Corps and a little bit more about him starting his company. But overall, these were both great conversations that I really enjoyed, and I know you're going to enjoy this one as well. So let's get into it. Here's episode 168 with Benjie Manibog. You mentioned having gone back and listened to the first episode. Yeah. One of the things that immediately kind of came out in my mind was when I interviewed you the first time, that was the first time I'd actually rented a studio. And if you remember that, Stu, it was actually really cool. And I was hoping to be able to use it for more episodes. And then literally within 3 months after that recording, they were out of business.
Oh, were they really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That place was pretty rad.
It was nice.
The different rooms, and it looked like, I don't know, just very, like I kind of had like a really cool theme to it, like an old school, like recording studio theme. Yeah.
With the carpets on the ground and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. It was really cool.
But it is one of those things that I look back on that conversation we had. And I even routinely will think back to how I first came to know of you. Mm-hmm. It was on LinkedIn, and I saw that picture of you in your red pants, and I was like, that guy would be cool to talk to. And I still fondly remember, because you were episode 28, so you were really early into my podcast career, that hearing your story of what you came from and then what you went to and succeeded to and achieved really is always one of those ones that, because it was the first one where it really kind of felt like, in a weird way, like me. And one of the things I say to people all the time is I achieved a lot in my career as far as rank, education, success. But in high school, it was, I don't even know if I'm going to graduate. I don't even know, and I really felt that that was the first time having a guest who really kind of felt like, man, I can picture the path that you were on, and it still resonates with me today.
Wow. Yeah. And it's interesting because after that podcast and after, disclosing a lot more, opening up to a lot more people about just like my past, I had so many people DM me and say, wow, I could relate to that. Or that's what I went through, or that's what I'm currently going through. I have a lot of high school seniors that'll reach out and say like, I want to join the Marine Corps. Like, you're inspiring me to join the Marine Corps. And I always felt like maybe I shouldn't do it because I'm such a knucklehead, or I was a knucklehead, and, maybe I won't be the right fit. And I have a lot of folks that reach out and say, no, like what you said and what you're telling me right now it's inspiring, because, I used to do drugs, or I used to get in trouble, and teachers used to say I'll never amount to anything. And, it just goes to show that, and even in your military career, like, just because it's like, oh, now I'm out of high school and I'm not a knucklehead anymore, doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to make knucklehead mistakes while you're in the military, because that definitely happens too. And so,
no, I don't believe it.
Yeah. And then even afterwards, like even now, and then what we'll end up talking about is that, even as a business owner and in our marriages and everything else we do in life, you're going to mess up. But it's like, just like those lessons I learned in high school, or during those times, like I could either victimize myself and say, oh man, I really screwed up. Well, I guess there's that. Or, hey, I screwed up. How can I learn from it? How can I help others now through that process, and then just move forward?
And the other part of the story that really hit me was I've had the opportunity now to interview enough guests who or not all, there's a lot of those, I'll call them recruiter stories, like the kind of the horror stories with recruiters promising the world, or recruiters not promising them anything. But yours, what really stuck out to me was you first interacted with this recruiter with the mohawk, and you're like, basically everything that you could think of worse to say. Yeah. But then moving forward, even if he did or didn't remember you, the fact that he didn't give up on you, and he was really kind of the one that said, hey, what about this option? Even after you'd even gone to talk to the Navy, and they're like, no. Yeah. And so that aspect of the recruiting story was really interesting.
Yeah. And it's, unfortunately, I hear a lot of guys, they'll reach out to me. A lot of these like high school students will reach out and they'll say, my recruiter isn't as encouraging to me, right? And I just tell people, like, you'll meet people that will be, and that'll come alongside you and mentor you. And it's really, my recruiter, Sean O'Leary, he was, I don't know, a diamond in the rough, I'd say, because during that time, it's not like, I mean, there was a lot of people coming through, because even though the war had just started, we still had a big influx of people coming and wanting to join. And it's not like he necessarily needed me in there. And he could have chose to do a lot of other things with his time, but he chose to stick around and, keep that door open to his recruiting office and say, hey, if you want to come in here, work out, do your homework, you know, and I'm not like, I guess I'd hope I'm a pleasure to be around now, but at that time, I don't know if I was so much pleasure to be around. Like, you know, I was, and so the fact that, like, I was telling my wife that I was hanging out somewhere. I can't remember where I was, but I was somewhere recently where there was a group of high school kids, and their conversations and everything they were talking about, and just the things that their mannerisms. I was like, gosh, these kids, I just can't wait to get away from these little teenage kids right here. I was like, these are so annoying, you know, and I never thought I'd be like that guy, like the get off my lawn guy, you know? And then I was thinking back of me as a kid and how people probably perceived me, and they were like, I can't wait to get away from this kid. And so the fact that recruiter took me in and was like, you know what, I'll allow you to be in here. I'll listen to your knucklehead stories, and I'll, you know, I'll help you out and help you grow. It's incredible.
That's one of the huge things for me. And I tell people every chance I get the opportunity is you're going to be around people who are going to encourage you. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, you're going to be around people that discourage you or point you in the wrong directions. Yeah. But where I'm going with this is, even as deep as you are, wherever your life is, be open, have your ears open, because you may not realize it at the time, but somebody may be trying, like you experienced. Hey, I'm not trying to be your dad. I'm not trying to tell you to change your life. But instead of going and screwing off, come hang out in my office, do your homework. Mm-hmm. Just giving you the opportunities.
Yeah. And it's funny because I could look back now at the time in my, you know, high school career. Actually, I'd say even in the military, there were times in my early military career where I didn't realize how much someone was helping me. At first I just thought, oh, this guy's just, you know, he's just trying to keep me accountable. Obviously I know that, but you know, he's coming down on me too hard on something that isn't really that big of a deal. And then I look back now, I'm like, well, he was coming down on me hard on that because he wants me to succeed. It's not that he's not getting anything else out of, you know, making sure that I'm doing right, other than, well, yeah, maybe there's an officer coming down hard on him because I'm screwing up or something. But
get your guy in line.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is, like, even when I was an NCO and then a senior staff NCO, like, I wanted my guys to succeed and do well. Not just because, like, you know, it was going to reflect bad on me if they didn't, but it was also because it's like, I want to see them grow and succeed and then help other people out afterwards. So, but I didn't realize it at the time. You know, at the time, I'm just in my world trying to do in my lane. And then when I look back now, I'm like, oh man, there were so many people that I never thanked. And I lost contact with a lot of them. I can't ever go back and be like, man, if it wasn't for you, I probably wouldn't have done this in my career or done this in my life. So it's amazing looking back now.
Going off something you've said now a couple times where you've got young kids, so not people who are transitioning out, but more the transitioning in, reaching out to you. Yeah. And something I look back on that I didn't ask you, you came from, and no pun intended, but a punk background into the Marine Corps. How was that transition, that day one on the Yellow Footprints for you, having been somebody who was so against the rules in society?
It was actually, at that point, I was well prepared. I'd say my recruiter got me really prepared for it because I was living and breathing in the recruiting office nearly every day to do my homework. I was around those guys. I was listening to how they spoke. I was, you know, watching all the same recruit training videos over and over again, you know, and then just the thing, everything I could find on the early days of YouTube, you know, in the very early 2000s. There wasn't much out there, but there was, you know, a few videos out there of just what Marine Corps was like. And I would just watch them and I would just soak that in. And so I was well prepared of like, okay, structure, they're going to yell at you. They're going to discipline you. It's not going to be easy. All right, let's do it. And one of the things that I think made it a lot easier was I had been told I was a piece of crap for a long portion of my life. I was getting yelled at by not only people in my family, but strangers and teachers and everyone else in positions of authority. So when I was getting yelled at by a drill instructor, I was like, all right, I've done this before. I've been stressed out before. I've been neglected before. You know, I've been all these things before. So when other people were, I don't know, just like in that shock, that moment of shock, like being in boot camp, it's not, I can't say I was completely comfortable. I'd be a liar to say like, all right, it was easy, but I'll say it was much easier than if I didn't have that experience.
Did you find that you were able to kind of blend and just stay off everybody's radar?
No, actually I chose to put myself in the radar because I wanted to be a leader. one of my goals going into boot camp, whereas before I would have said I wanted to be the gray man, where I just wanted to, avoid that extra attention. I wanted it because I wanted, at that point in my life, I had said, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to be the best at it. Whereas before I was like, well, if I'm going to do something, I'm just going to get by at it. So I totally flipped that around when I was 18, and it paid off extremely well in the long run. In the beginning, it was like, uh-oh, I was the guy day 3.
Be careful what you ask for.
Yeah, and then it was like, it's like someone that's really good at their job, and you're like, oh, I'm doing really well, and so they're like, oh, he's good at this. Let's give him more responsibility, and you're like, oh, wait, hang on a second, and so it was almost like that, but in a way, it definitely helped me.
You came into the soft community at your 5-year mark, correct? Mm-hmm. When was it, and where I want to go with this is, again, something I didn't ask before. When you realized that that's what you wanted to get to, how soon did you start really trying to ramp up your training to prepare for it? And then flow into that, what's the selection process like? Again, somebody's young who's thinking about going that pipeline.
Yeah, actually, people always thought, they're like, I knew, like, a lot of my NCOs, when I first joined, they were like, you need to go, like, you don't belong here. You belong in some, like, they're like recon or something like that, right? And so it's because the way I trained was unlike how everyone else trained. People did their PT, their minimum, and then they would bounce. But I like to do hard stuff. I was the guy that, you seen Generation Kill and Rudy Reyes, he puts on a gas mask and the plate carrier, and he's like going out there on a run. I was like, I want to be like that. And I would do, silly things like that, right? And people would be like, what the heck is this guy doing? And I look back at some of the PT, the self-inflicted suffering, that I would put on myself, like going down to the beach down by Camp Del Mar when I was with the 15th MEU, and I would, run along the beach and jump in the water and then do push-ups with my face, going through the waves and stuff, like just stuff that, like, if someone was watching from a distance, they'd be like, what is that guy doing? Like, why is he doing that stuff? But it's because I wanted to, I was motivating myself to, like, if I'm going to be something, I want to be the best. I want to be hard. I want to be strong, fast. And even if I'm just like a logistics guy, I don't care, because if we go under attack or something happens, like, I don't want to be ill prepared. I want to be mentally strong and be ready for it. So when the time came where I was like, I'm going to put my package in for ANS, they were like, yeah, you should have done that a long time ago.
We've been waiting.
Yeah, we've been waiting. Yeah, you're a weirdo. You need to go over there, not where we're at. But what I ended up finding out, though, was a lot of the training and what I made up in my head as far as, like, what things would be like, I actually kind of made it worse. And so when I got there, I was like, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought. And I'm not saying it was easy, like boot camp. It was freaking hard, and I was like in the middle of the pack. But I wasn't getting woken up in the middle of the night and having to jump into a cold, pool or something like that. It's like the people that, like, prior to boot camp, I was taking cold showers, for like 20 minutes standing there in the cold shower. And I'm like, that was so unnecessary. Like, I didn't need to do that. Thinking I was making myself strong, mentally tough. Yeah.
Were you finding that those around you, when you were doing this crazy level of training, were kind of, hey, good on you? Or was it like, what the hell are you doing?
It was more the latter. People were like, what the hell are you doing? Because, I'd say majority of people, they do what they have to do. And then you get to this point of being comfortable. You earn your t-shirt, right? You're like, hey, I'm a Marine now. Boom. I'm good. I could just do the minimum. I do my rifle range every year. I do the annual PFT. And when the PFT is getting ready to, I know it's coming. Maybe I'll train a little bit harder so that way I don't, like, look like a bag of ass. But I didn't want to be like that. And what I came to find is when I got to selection, it was like, here are my people. These are other guys that were maybe not to that level extreme. There was a few that were like that, also like me, that were doing some ridiculous things. But everyone that was there just wanted to be better. And they just wanted to, like, get after it. And not just physically, but, like, intellectually as well. And so, and then that process, you weed people out that either can't make it because, they shouldn't have been there in the first place. So those guys that are like, they see the poster of what MARSOC is, and they're like, oh man, like you get to jump out of planes, you get to, dive and do all these really cool things. All those things look cool, but the cooler it looks, like the harder it is, and the crappier it makes you feel, right? So like coming out of the water, and you're wearing all this crap and whatever. What you're really thinking is you're like, my back hurts because I just finned, like 2K or 3K or whatever, and it sucks. Like, so everything that looks cool sucks. It sucks to do.
Marketing 101. Don't show the bad side of things. Show everybody the cool stuff.
Yeah, show the app. Yeah. You see people in their dress blues, looking like, yeah, what's up? And you're like, oh, but to get those, it's hard, right? And in order to, wear the O2 and you're jumping out of a plane and all that stuff, it looks cool. But, when you're standing there, like what they don't see is everyone jocked up for hours just waiting on the plane, to go. And you're like, I got to piss, but I can't because I already got JMPI'd, so it sucks. But
was there a point for you that, and I really hope people who haven't listened to your episode go back and listen to everything you went through kind of growing up, because I really think they'd be surprised to hear you talking about getting to that level. But I don't want to spoil it and just rehash everything we talked about before. But was there a point that you went, this is my purpose, where you really felt like, with everything that had gone on in my life before this is where I'm supposed to be?
Yeah. And I think where I found that, there's a couple things that first came to mind, and it might sound weird, but it was actually just being with the guys. Not one of them was on deployment. I'm thinking back of just being around the guys and just joking with them and just being with them. And another time was just in training, and we were all together, kind of suffering together. And the reason why that came to my mind, like, this is my purpose to be with these people, is because I think the relationships that we build are some of the most important things that we do in this world while we're alive. And that has some of the most meaning and purpose, and also it carries on much further, right? You could accomplish something. It might make an impact, but I think the people that you impacted or the people that you did it with, I think carries along much further. So, but the reason why I say those people is because collectively, everyone was, I don't know, just in it for some of the same reasons, right? A lot of people might have had different reasons, but altogether, people wanted to make a difference, right? Whether they said that there was their main reason or not, like, you wouldn't join if you didn't want to have some sort of impact in some way. And so being with a collective group of guys that had that camaraderie with each other, want to keep each other safe and looking out for one another, but also are completing a mission together, that is where I was like, all right, now I'm right where I belong. I have a sense of belonging here. And I think that's why when people get out, that's what they struggle with the most, is like, I've lost my purpose. I've lost being with my tribe.
You can put in for selection how early into your being in the Marine Corps?
I think now you have to be, I could be wrong, but for those that are in the Marine Corps, you can't go straight away. So you can't ask your recruiter, I want a contract for MARSOC. It's not going to happen. I believe you have to be in at least 2 years, and then you could put in a package. I could be wrong on that, because I think before it used to be you had to complete an enlistment, and then you could try to re-enlist for it. But I believe it's 2 years. But if they go to marsoc.com, all the requirements are listed there.
And so day one or the start of selection to the end of it, how long is it and what's the process?
Yeah, so what you'll have to do now, before they had what was just A&S, assessment and selection, which was like 21 days roughly. And then they included what's called ASPOC, which is assessment and selection, preparation and orientation course, right? And so that's a 3 week, so another 21 days tacked to it of kind of, it's like the assessment before the assessment. So they bring in a lot of guys, like hundreds of people will show up to this thing, and it kind of, they evaluate you, they PT you, they kind of teach you a couple soft skills like land nav, just to refresh everyone, to give everyone like an equal playing field. Because you got guys coming from, an infantry background. You got guys coming from like the Marine Corps band, right? And everything in between. So you're like, hey, there's the Marine Corps trumpet players here, then there's a recon guy here, and we're all trying out for the same thing. So they do this prep course the first 3 weeks as like a...
The trumpet guy's killing it.
He is. It's crazy because and this is just a quick offshoot. In ITC, the individual training course, which was 9 months of the time that I went, we had 9 recon guys in our class, and only one of them passed. But we had a ton of admin guys and a ton of logistics guys that all made it through. So it's really interesting to show, like, you don't necessarily have to come from some tactical background in order to complete this training and to do well in it, right? There's a lot of guys that dropped out and just couldn't grasp or didn't have the maturity level or whatever it was that they got dropped for. But it's 21 days prep, and then assessment begins after the prep course ends, like immediately. And there's a very stark difference in how they do things between ASBOC and ANS.
And where do they run that training at?
ASBOC is in North Carolina, in Stone Bay. It's like right near the Marine Special Operations headquarters in Stone Bay. And then ANS, they take you up north, I believe still, could have changed, but it used to be up in Virginia. And I don't know exactly where, or I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say where, but I know it's in Virginia somewhere. Yeah.
For you and all of that self-imposed, I'll call it punishment, that you put on yourself before going in, was there still an aspect through that selection process that really challenged you?
I think the biggest challenge for me was not getting feedback, because in the rest of the Marine Corps, in the rest of my life, you do something, it's like there's an immediate reaction, right? There's an action and the reaction of like, was it good or was it bad? And people would let you know, like, hey, Benji, you screwed up, or hey, good job, like you did it well. At ANS, you don't get any feedback. So you have instructions, right? And instructions could be extremely vague. And it could be, hey, I need you to go from point A to point B, and these are things in between, or something like that, right? And if there's any question you have, you're like, okay, well, what about this? And you ask the cadre, they'll say,
figure it out.
They'll say, candidate, what were your instructions? And you go, okay. And then you look at the whiteboard again. Yeah, but I'm not grasping this. Well, and then you ask that, and they're like, what were your instructions? You're like, shoot. And then you complete it, and you're looking to them for like, okay, like this good? Like this is the way I did it? And they just look at you, and then they just take notes. And you're like, crap, like he's writing the worst thing down ever, right? And you have no idea what he's writing down.
Is half the challenge, or is half the training seeing how you think?
A lot of it is, they're going over 10 traits, and I can't rattle off the 10 traits off the top of my head, but I know the physical ability is obviously a big part of it. And that's the thing that people hyper focus on. It's definitely what I hyper focus on. I was like, I got to be hard. I got to be tough. I got to be strong. There's a lot of really strong, tough, fast people out there that failed. And because they're also looking for effective intelligence as well. They're looking for critical thinking skills. They're looking to see if you could if you have good judgment on something that's extremely complex. It's not like a black and white, like, all right, you can make this choice or this choice. Both choices could be right, but why are you choosing it? It's like kind of like the root of why you're choosing it is what matters more, right? And so you get put in these scenarios in between different parts of the training, right? You'll complete one thing, and then they'll pull you aside and say, hey, you got to go here and do the scenario. And so you do the scenario, and you come out of that going, oh man, like I screwed up, or you're like replaying it in your head. You're doing like, what is it? When you're like pretending to fight in the shower and you're like talking to the shampoo bottle. All right? You're like, I should have said this, like, why didn't I think of that at the time, But that's how you get out of those scenarios, and you're like, oh man, like, why didn't I say this?
I'm sorry. The one that I was going to make a comment, but it doesn't apply to me because I don't use shampoo. But the next time I'm in the shower, I'm having a fight with the shampoo bottle. And damn it, I'm going to win this time.
Yeah, I'm going to win. Yeah. I don't know. He might have won. The shampoo bottle might have won the war this time. Yeah. I don't know.
I'm assuming, though, coming through that selection process, that is literally the crawling phase to it.
Oh, yeah.
Just because you make it through that, then the real training starts, I would imagine.
Yeah. So, and that was kind of that's a misconception that a lot of people have in their head, is that, oh, once I complete selection and I get selected, cool. That means like I'm going to be a special operator. No, it doesn't. That just means you're qualified to go through the training. Like you're qualified to come and try out again. Right. And so, and that's what's really interesting. And I thought A&S was really hard and ITC was much harder. But what I love though, is that all those guys that I went through with that came out of selection, because the selection part, I laugh because you don't get any feedback until like the last day when they rattle off the numbers of, because you don't have names, you just have your number, right? So you sew your number on your chest and on your pants and everything you have, and they do it differently every class. But for my class, they wrote names on they wrote the numbers on a whiteboard, and all those numbers that said if this is your number, be outside at this time. And so I'm looking through the numbers. I know it's like around the last day, and I'm like, okay, that guy's really solid. That guy's solid. That guy's solid. I was like, oh, all these numbers are like studs. And I was like, and there's my number. I'm like, oh, thank God, I'm in this list, right? And then there's some goober that's not on the list, and he's like, oh, you guys got dropped, like, and I'm like, I want to rethink that, you know? And so all the studs we're all walking out, and I don't want to put myself in that category of the stud. I'm midway in there, but these like high caliber guys are all walking out of there, and you know, the other guys or the bench warmers are sitting there like, yeah, see you later, losers. Meanwhile, they have no idea that they're about to get eliminated, right? But that's when I knew, like, I'm like, all right, I'm with a solid group. And then we went on to ITC.
Of all the advanced training, diving, free fall, all that, anything give you like significant pause? You're like, man, I am not looking forward to going through this certification process.
I wasn't looking forward to SEER school. But like in hindsight, I'm like, it wasn't the worst thing, right? There was moments of it where you're like, man, this sucks. Like no one wants to like be shoved into a really small confined space, and then, you know, you're up for hours and then someone pulls you out of the box and you're like, oh, thank God. And they just beat you and then they put you back in. You're like, well, this sucks, right? Like no one wants that, right? But it wasn't the worst thing. But ITC was hard because, again, it was like that fear of like, I could get dropped at any second. It's like being on the range and you know, I'm in control. I have my weapon. I know as long as my finger is straight off the trigger and outside the trigger guard, I'm not going to ND. But for whatever reason in your head, they tell you like, if you ND, you're done. And so you're just so like, oh my gosh, like it could go off at any second. I'm done, right? And so there's like this constant fear of just being dropped because like something so small could get you. ND is not a small deal. That's a big deal,
right?
But you know, something small. For example, like I wore a tank top in the chow hall. I don't know if I talked about this in the first episode,
no.
but on a weekend, on a Saturday, I went into the chow hall with a tank top on, and someone took a photo of me and sent it up to MARSOC headquarters, and they're like, "We found this guy." An ITC student wearing a tank top in the chow hall. He's above the rules, you know? And then so that came down from higher, like, oh, you are not worthy of being a special operations Marine. You skylined yourself. And I'm like, just wore a tank top. They're like, it's against Marine Corps Order, Papa 10 20.34 Golf, with changes 1 through 5. I remember the order now because like I was like studying that order to make sure I was like, you know, but it's crazy though to think that like anything could get you dropped. So that was one of my biggest fears.
And I would imagine that that's an indicator, though, of what they thought of you going through that process, because for anybody else, that might have been the one they're like, you're gone. See ya. You know, if they were looking for that way to get you out.
Yeah, but what was great is because it came from the highest, they sent it to the general of MARSOC and everything else. So it was like, it came from the top down, like the highest it could go, right? But what was cool is my proctor and my, you know, my cadre that was for my team, they were like, no, he's solid. You're not going to kick him out because he wore a tank top, right? And at that time, I was the element leader on my team so it's like basically being like the squad leader, right? So they're like, well, you're the element leader. Well, your punishment is now you're not the element leader. So I was like, all right, I'm fine with that. It's better than getting dropped, right? So, but it is interesting that because there was an incident that happened during that same time. There was a MARSOC Marine named Adam Kanash, who is famous for beating the daylights out of a cab driver in North Carolina, and it made national news. Well, that happened the same weekend that I wore the tank top in the chow hall. So when they were coming down on me saying like, MARSOC Marines never skyline themselves. I'm like, have you seen the news? Like, it's all over Fox, CNN, everything. Like, that's one of ours, right? And one of our instructors. Right? He was one of our instructors, and I can't say anything bad about him. He was actually a solid instructor and a solid Marine. Just had a really terrible night and made a very terrible choice. But other than that, heard he was a great guy. But all that to say that anything could get you, like one small mistake could either ruin you completely, or it just depends on who's overlooking you.
Well, and like something you've already said, when you first went into boot camp and got into the Marine Corps, your mindset was to be a leader, to be somebody that people could model themselves after.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that also drove you through selection and ITS, in the sense that you said you were an element leader. So you were already putting yourself, and I don't mean this like better than anybody else, but you were pushing yourself. So you almost had a couple extra rungs on the ladder to fall down when you did make that mistake. Had you maybe not been an element leader, there wouldn't have been anything that they could have dropped you down to.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely, and like I said, I was somewhere in the middle of the pack in ITC, because I wasn't terrible. If I was, I would have been gone a long time ago. But because I was somewhat in the middle, I was able to, I had some grace. But there were some, and like I said, just being around the caliber of guys I was with at MARSOC, it's who I always wanted to be around, because it's like there was like that healthy competition where it's like, before I was in the top 10% in the Marine Corps, where it's like I was always first on the runs. I was always like had the most pull-ups. I always, just was, I hate to say it, but I was better than a lot of the other guys, right? In a lot of ways. And then I get to MARSOC and I'm like, oh, I am not the best. Like, there are some serious studs. And then you think you get out of ITC and you're like, I'm at the top of my game. I'm out of the schoolhouse. Like, I'm going to get to this team and I'm going to crush it, because like we're at the best physical shape of our lives. So we think. And then you get to the team and you're like, holy crap, my team chief, he's like, 15 years older than me, and he's crushing it. And he's doing much better than I am. I'm having a hard time keeping up with him. And so that's what I love being around, is being around guys that constantly are trying to better themselves and constantly just they're like, I'm not satisfied with who I was yesterday, or just because I accomplished this yesterday doesn't mean I'm that good today, and I need to continually do it.
From initial going into ANS to actually being assigned to a team, what's the time frame process?
Yeah, it's about a year. It's about a year to a year and a half, depending. When I went through, I was only class 9 in ITC, and now I'm not sure what class they're on. But at that time, we didn't have language school. That was like an absolute requirement. Now, guys, a short couple of years later, after I went through, they had made that a requirement. And now they also, I think they added like jump and free fall and dive and stuff like that, kind of like as far as like the pipeline goes, from what I understand. But at that time it wasn't that way. So you would go, ANS and then ITC, which was anywhere between, it's about a year, right? And then because ITC is 9 months, and then after that you go to a team, and then you would train, and depending on where you are in the workup, then you'll do jump school. Then you'll come back and maybe do some other skill that they want you to go through. But the training never stops. It's like there's never an off season where you're like, all right, I'm not going to train for a year, right? Like, no, like that's what you do. You do an individual training phase. You come to a team, you do your individual training phase where you're going to all these different schools, and then you do a unit training phase where now you and your team are now training together. Then your company trains together, and then you deploy. And then you repeat, rinse and repeat over and over again.
Did you deploy before being assigned to MARSOC? And obviously you did deploy afterwards, but what was that comparison like for you?
Yeah, I did 3 deployments prior to MARSOC, and then went through the training pipeline and then deployed multiple times with MARSOC. The difference is night and day, because before MARSOC, again, part of it was because I might've been junior. But I just wasn't aware of like the big picture. I just knew like, this is my role. This is what I'm doing. And I'm like, does this matter what I'm doing? I don't know. Maybe I just know we're here because we're helping, but like, I wasn't really sure about what the unit was doing in general. I just knew we were there. Right. And for those for those deployments before MARSOC, it was kind of just like, I just did what I was told, and I just wasn't privy to like anything else going on in the battle space, right? Whereas at MARSOC, it's like I was part of every step of the way, the planning process leading up to the deployment, where it's like I knew every detail about the AO and about what we were doing prior to getting there. And then once I'm there, we're collecting our own information. We're not getting handed like, it's not like the movies where it's like a manila envelope, gets handed to you and you're like, gentlemen, like, here's your mission. You got to take out, secret. Yeah, you got to take out target, whoever. And it's got like the Polaroid photo of them and you're like, oh, okay, and then you just go and you do like a 5-second ad hoc, like planning, it's like very detailed. You're planning this thing out and you're collecting your own information and you're doing the F3AD cycle, right? Like, so you're find, fixing, finishing, and then your exploitation, right? Of the
information you gathered,
then you analyze it, and then you distribute it, right? And then that cycle just continuously repeats, right? Whereas before, it was kind of like, unless you were in the leadership position or unless you were in some type of position where you're part of the planning process, you're just like a goober, just sitting there like, I'm not sure what's going on, but I just know I have to do this job, right?
The reason why I was conflicted, and not necessarily conflicted, because one of the things that I still distinctly remember in our first conversation was, and I'm putting a little bit on it in the sense that you had a lot going on in your headspace with your wife's illness as you were coming to the end. But you also said something of the luster kind of started getting worn off near the end too, and how things were being done and how the team was being run. So where my conflict came was I was interested in your headspace start to end, your time when you deployed as a regular Marine and time you're deployed as MARSOC. I understand their mission sets are completely different, but I was kind of wondering how the impact on you and what you saw differently.
Yeah, I think where it came, it was like the total different sides of the spectrum, where I was on one side of the spectrum, I was completely ignorant, like ignorance is bliss. I'm just there, existing. And then on the other side, I feel like I knew not too much, but I had a much deeper understanding of what was happening and what was going on. And my sense of our overall national strategic strategy. And I guess at that time too, I'd gotten my bachelor's degree in strategic studies and defense analysis. So the way I looked at things was through a totally different lens, where I was looking at things through, the economic, geographic, and cultural points of view, where I'm not just looking at something like, oh, here's my mission in this country. I just have to smash Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and that's it. I'm looking at, okay, how in this battle space, what is the most appropriate courses of action that not just my team could take, but our nation as a whole? Like, are we fitting into this bigger picture in the most appropriate way? And the more I understood those things, the more I was like, are we doing what's the most appropriate thing? Right. And part of me thought, well, if I look at this from a higher level, I could say, yeah, we might be doing a good thing, but in the long run, it might have very minuscule effect, or it could potentially have a negative impact. Right. Whereas if I were to look at it from a different point of view and write it out myself, I would say, these are the things I would do differently, and this is how I would use us instead. But I don't have that control. So I could either be fuming over it and say, well, we should be doing this and complain, or I could say, I'm going to do my mission, but I'm also going to be like, I don't want to do it anymore. Right. And so that's why I like where I'm at today, where now I could have more control over what I'm doing, versus before it's like I had some control, but there was these left and right lateral limits. I had commander's intent, left and right lateral limits, and then I operate within those.
At the time when you were in, was to be assigned to a MARSOC team, are they only East Coast? Are they East Coast, West Coast? Are they all around the world?
So MARSOC headquarters is on the East Coast, and now all the battalions are on the East Coast. When I was in, we had the West Coast Battalion, which I was at first the best coast, and then we had the East Coast. We had 2 battalions on the East Coast, 2 Raider battalions on the East Coast. There's now support battalions within those as well. But so you'll train from there, you'll do everything from there on the East Coast now, and then you'll deploy all over the world. right? So we're in AFRICOM, PACOM, and CENTCOM. And I believe they're opening up battle spaces all over now just because of what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. So I'm assuming it's going to be in that part of the world too.
Any piece of your military career that you want to make sure gets out, especially thinking about those young kids that have been asking you a lot of questions that we haven't addressed?
You know, I was thinking about that because people would ask me all the time, like, is there anything that you wish you would have done differently? Or is there anything that you regret? Or if you could do it all over again, would you do it? And depending on where I'm at in my mindset, there's times where I say, you know what? I wish I never did. I wish because like hindsight's always, you think, oh, if I did this differently, something would have turned out better. I would do it 100 times over again. The thing I would say that I want people to know is it comes with a lot of sacrifice, more than people realize. And you have a lot more control over that sacrifice than you might think. And where I don't want to necessarily say failed, but the choices that I made during that time caused me to sacrifice a lot of time with my family. It caused me to sacrifice a lot of other areas in order to gain something else. So there was give and take. I definitely gained something. So that sacrifice wasn't for nothing. And in the long run, it helped me, but it also hurt me in certain areas. And so just being able to recognize that, and before you make those decisions, really weigh those options, because even though things ended up working for me, a lot of people made those same choices and it didn't work for them because the people around them didn't accept it the same way. Whereas I have a very loving and forgiving family and a very supportive network of people that I know. Whereas there's some people that don't have that same level or the same maturity and understanding, or this, of their family members or their wife or their kids. And so just understand that if you make certain choices, it could have very negative implications or positive ones, but you got to weigh those.
When I get the opportunity to talk to people, and I look that same kind of window on your past life, and would you do anything different? There are certain things, of course, that I'm not proud of. I don't like having the word divorced behind my name. Mm-hmm. I have had struggled relationships with my kids because of it. Mm-hmm. There have been things that I've enjoyed doing. There were times where I remember as a new detective, just getting so immersed in wanting to be that I made the conscious decision just not to go home in the evening. Mm-hmm. I'm going to keep running down this lead or whatever that didn't really need to be.
Yeah.
At the moment, it felt right. And then you get to enough laps around the sun where you can look back and you say to yourself, God, I wish I shouldn't have done that. Yeah. But at the same token, where I'm at right now, I love my life. And if I was able to go back and make any change in what I did, I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah.
So you have to look at where you're at now and go, okay, I may not have made the best decisions. When you come to that rationalization, start making the best decisions for your family and those around you going forward.
There's Yeah. You can't go in the past. So it's like, you just have to understand that we made those decisions for a reason. And life's teaching you a lesson, whether you realize it or not. Right. And it's up to us to figure out if we're, grasping those lessons or if we're just ignoring them. And I think many of these life lessons came to me very early on in life, and I just chose to not see them, or I had the blinders on. I wasn't mature enough to understand that. Like I said before, like there's people in my life that were mentoring me. And at the time I was like, this guy's annoying me, not realizing this guy's providing wisdom, like not just knowledge, but straight up wisdom, because he's experienced this and he's telling me from his own experience, like, don't make the same mistakes. And, and I heard this quote was like, a wise man learns from the mistakes of others and a fool learns from his own mistakes. Right. Well, actually a fool doesn't learn his mistakes at all, but eventually he'll learn. But if you can learn the mistakes of other people, man, that makes you wise.
You ever feel like your body just isn't keeping up the way it used to? We all know that life doesn't slow down, and sometimes the grind shows up in ways that we might not expect. Lower energy, focus that's a little off, maybe even motivation that isn't quite there. Human Performance TRT knows what it's like to want to get that edge back, and they're here to help you do it without the runaround. A veteran and first responder-owned company, they're not just your typical telehealth service that just hands out prescriptions. Human Performance takes a full view of your health. First, you hop on a video call with one of their expert providers who goes through your goals, your blood work, and any specific needs you've got. From there, they create a personalized plan that goes beyond just hormones. If you need support with mental health, they've got it. If you're looking to get serious about weight management, they can coach you through it. The best part, they keep it flexible. No locked-in subscriptions. As you progress, they're checking in, making adjustments, and keeping your health plan up to date. Because what works today might look different down the line. Everything they do is sent right to your door, hassle-free, so you can stay focused on the things that matter. And here's another benefit. If you're already on a hormone replacement program or have recent blood work, Human Performance makes it easy to transition. If your lab results are less than 6 months old, you could submit those directly. No need for new blood work. They'll review your current levels and build a customized plan based on where you're at now, so you don't have to start from scratch. It's just another way that Human Performance puts you first, meeting you where you're at on your health journey. Human Performance TRT is built around your success. This isn't a one-and-done approach. It's ongoing with real guidance because your health deserves more than just a quick fix. If you're ready to take the next step towards optimized health, check out Human Performance and see what a real personalized approach looks like. And for listeners of the Transition Drill podcast, use the promo code TDP for 10% off throughout the entire time you work with Human Performance. So head over to hptrt.com and remember to use the promo code TDP, that's Tom David Paul, for 10% off your program.
And so, but just as you said, if I make any choice differently during my military career, I don't know if I'd have the same life I am today or would have today. And my wife's even said that. She's like, I understand that because you lied to me back during this time. There was a time where I had just gotten back from deployment, was gone for 6 months, came home, was home on 2 weeks of leave, went to a 2-month-long school, came home for 10 days. And during that 10-day period, they were like, hey, there's a school spot opened up. It's 4 months long. You don't have to go, but if you want to, it'll really help the team. And I'm like, yeah, I'll take it. And they're like, well, talk to your wife. I'm like, nah, it's good. Put me on. I'll tell her. And then I came home, I'm like, hey, they sent me. Like, I have no choice, but she said, because you lied to me and went there, because I would have told you, no, don't go. But because you went to that, it opened up all these doors for you later because it gave you these skills and it made you this certain asset on your team that who knows what your life would have been like if you hadn't done that. So this isn't like the green light for everyone to like, hey, go lie to your wife now because it's going to open up all these amazing doors. It's not to say that, but
every decision has repercussions and consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the one thing that I would say is, and I try to say this, the great thing about both of our careers, the veteran community, the first responder community, they give you the opportunity to do a lot of cool shit.
Mm-hmm.
Take those opportunities, but take them with your eyes wide open and understand that every decision that you make that takes you away from your family this little much is going to have this big of a much impact on your family.
Oh, yeah.
I've got buddies who worked homicide and, they'll tell you, I don't have a relationship with one or a couple of my kids because when I was in homicide, it was all homicide. And when we got a new case, we were running 3, 4 days, 5 days in a row, almost nonstop. Yeah. But that constantly away from your family is going to have an impact on you.
Oh yeah. And where I realized, and this is even after the military, during Thrash and Raid and all that stuff, my company, I would always tell people, I would say, my family's the most important thing to me. My kids, like, I love my kids so much. But then one day I was going through my phone and I was looking at all my pictures and videos and stuff I had on my phone. I couldn't find a single one of my kids, like mixed. I'd find like maybe 1 or 2 mixed in with the hundreds of other videos and photos I had of like the events I was doing and my friends and like, just whatever else. And I was like, wow, are my kids the most important thing to me? Because it seems like my whole life is surrounded by everything but my kids. And so I'm like, I could say all day long that they're the most important thing, but am I walking that?
And not to be sarcastic though, to put it in reference, you had rather young kids at this point in your life. So it's not like you had adult or older teenage kids where like, they're never home, you know? It's, you had those young kids, so you would think that they would be popping up in pictures more frequently.
Exactly. Or me with them in pictures. But it was, if there was a picture, it was a picture that I had received from, you know, from my wife or from my mom or from whoever that took the picture of them. And that to me, I was like, oh, like maybe they're not as big of a priority as I thought. And, you know, like someone gave me this analogy and I was like, wow, this is exactly my life, where it's like, you know, I'm a Christian now, but at the time I wasn't. For a really big portion of my life, I wasn't. And, you know, for those that are Christian or religious in general, like God is number one in your priority. And then it's your wife, if you're married, and then your kids, and then it's your, you know, hobbies and everything else. And then work is down here. That's where it kind of should be. But my life is like flipped like this, where it's like work is my priority, then my hobbies, then my kids, and then my wife, and then God didn't exist, right? And so for me, it's like flipping that around drastically changed my life, because I said it was like this. I'm like, oh yeah, like this is most important, like, you know, my family and everything else. Like I didn't say God at the time because I wasn't religious, but I was like, yeah, family's number one. My wife and my kids. Didn't live that way. Work and all that was number one.
With the ability now to look back on your career in the military, the impact that it had on your family, and I know this is going to sound like an all or nothing type question, but do you honestly believe that you could have balanced family and your time in MARSOC and still been able to, what you perceive or what we would all perceive as succeeding in MARSOC and advancing in MARSOC? And where I'm going with this, it's obviously a loaded question, but the one thing that a lot of people don't realize, they see the cool sides of what those teams can do, but it's the demands that we talked about that get put on your family. But at the same token, if you're not there with your team and what they perceive as 100% buy-in, you're left behind. You can.
It just, people got to understand though, is that you're going to have you're going to have less time with your family regardless. But when you do have time with your family, how are you really spending it? Where I made the mistake was I had opportunities where I could have had time with my family and I chose not to. So those are some things. I didn't have to choose every time to not be with my family. I did. I chose every time. I could have, there were some things that didn't matter. Like you said, you look back and you're like, did I really have to stay overnight? Probably not. I could have got this done later. There were some things that I went to that I'm like, I didn't have to go to it. I just wanted to because I knew like it was going to make me look good career-wise. So just recognizing those things. Is this absolutely necessary or is this just a nice to have? So if you could differentiate between that, that'll help. The other thing is when you are off, you know, my stepdad said something, this is a nugget of wisdom that I said that I didn't take. I used to think my stepdad was like the dumbest person ever. And to this day, I don't think he's the smartest guy, but he did say some smart things to me back then. And one of the things he said was, wherever you are, be there. And at the time I was like, oh, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But now I'm hearing it, I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. And so when you're with your family, be with your family, not anywhere else. And so today I recognize that if I'm home, I want to be, if I'm sitting next to my kid and we're both on our phones, that's not being with my family. That's me being on my phone and them being on their phone, or us watching TV or whatever it is, right? I want to be engaged. And there were so many times at MARSOC where I'd be with the guys all day. All of us would be together. And then we'd get off and we'd have a weekend and we're like, all right, we'd plan together, like, all right, let's get together this weekend and drink and like, you know, party or whatever. And then we would plan some rager at somebody's house. And I'm like, hey babe, this weekend, this is what we're doing. We're going to Josh's house. You know, everyone's going, you can hang out with the wives. And then, you know, and then that's what it was. It was the wives hanging out and then us, you know, doing cake stands and whatever. And it's like, that's not spending time together. That's spending time again with your friends.
And that's the double-edged sword of what assignments like that require. It is, for the most part, a young man's, I'll call it a hobby. I'll call it whatever you want to refer to it. In a weird, I'm trying to think of a negative sarcasm to it, because to a degree it is. We, when we're in the middle of it, whether it's, oh man, I went to SWAT school, at that moment in our lives, if we don't have the maturity to see the big picture, that's all we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we do it to the detriment of our family.
Oh yeah.
Hey babe, you could come, but you could go hang out with the wives.
Yeah.
But as odd as this sounds, there is an aspect that those assignments need that young, blinders on, only focused on this because of the demands that they require. So it is a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it truly is. It truly is a double-edged sword because you do have to be hyper-focused on the mission. At the same time, when you do have the opportunities to be present, be present. And I'd say when I was a gunny on my team and I had some of the younger guys, and they're not that much younger, but 5 or 6 years, younger in the pipeline, I guess, I don't know, they were just different than the guys that I grew up with, or came up in the teams with. Because the guys I came up in the team with, we were like how I was saying, like we were knuckleheads and we would party together and do whatever. And then once I was a senior guy on the team, I'm like, all right, like got these new guys coming in. And then I'd say, hey guys, like whose house we going to? And they're like, oh no, we're gonna spend time with our families. I'm like, what? Like,
Weirdos.
What are you guys, gay? You spend time with your family? Like, we're just like, what the heck? Yeah, but so I'd say people are doing a better job now, or at least during that time. So I can't speak for it right now at this very moment, but I think there is a shift.
I really think you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about the younger generations coming into these careers.
Mm-hmm.
I know the millennials were the first to really start kind of get beat over the head. Now you got Gen Z and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the one thing that they are going to benefit these communities and these careers long-term is 20 or 30 years from now, we're not going to be hearing as much about the mental headspace issues because they're already good right now with saying, you know what, this isn't working for me. Or they're better at, you know what, I need to balance my free time with my work time.
Yeah, and actually, it's like, again, this is a double-edged sword about and we could probably go on about the next generations, but it's like, it's a terrible thing because it's like, man, these new guys, they just keep asking why, and they just don't shut up, and they're just like, just do what you're supposed to do. But at the same time, I actually like it that they're not afraid to speak up. And even if they're speaking up about something dumb, the fact that they're just not afraid to do it, I think is an amazing attribute to have. And so even though I disagree with so much about this generation and some of the things that they are speaking out against, I just wish that energy and that level of like confidence to be able to speak out against something that they believe in would be focused on something that is, I don't know, has more weight and meaning behind it. And this isn't, I'm not trying to say like, don't be passionate about anything, but I love that about this generation or this next generation is that they're not afraid to tell their CO like, hey, I don't like this. Whereas before I'm like, I ain't gonna tell them that. I just got to do what I'm supposed to do. Right. Yeah.
There is a little bit, you could, however you want to refer to it. I've used the analogy of you were a gunny, you had 15 years in.
Mm-hmm.
You've, in your mind, and maybe to other people around you, earned the right because of your time in to ask certain questions.
Yeah.
They have that, like you said, they have that same confidence at a year in to go, hey, wait a minute. Again, we go back to that double-edged sword thing.
Yeah.
Some of it's really good. Some of it, there's times where you just need people to go, just shut up and do your job.
Just shut up, man. Haven't you read Message to Garcia? That, I don't know, in the Marine Corps, that's like one of the first books you read as like a young Marine, and it's this guy gets handed a letter and they say, hey, don't ask questions, just take the letter and go bring it here. And he delivers the message. He has all these distractions and he just goes and does it, right? And that's the show, like, hey, junior Marines, like if you get told to do something, you get told, get down. You get down. You don't go, why? And then you get shot, right? And so I think people just need to understand like when's the appropriate time. But I liked when a lot of the younger guys would speak up about stuff or ask and get clarification. And I use this on my kids now too. Whereas when I was a kid, I would ask my mom or my uncle or whoever I was living with at the time, I would say, why do we have to do this? And they'd say, well, because I said so. And I hated that answer. And so when I tell my kids something, I say, hey, we got to do this because, and I give the answer, right? Because I think that's what this generation wants. They just want that justification.
And I think that goes back to the core tenets of leadership. For the most part, you don't have, I would say 99% of the time, you've got the time and freedom to explain the why.
Mm-hmm.
And half the time you get resistance is because the person wants to know the why on the other end of the order.
Mm-hmm.
That 1% of the time where it's just do this now because I said so, but you build that capital, you build in that buffer to where that one time when I say do it now, yes, boss, we'll get it taken care of. And maybe even you still circle around when it's completed and go, hey, this is why I said to do it. I didn't have the time to explain it.
Yeah.
So that goes back into just leadership, basic leadership.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, there were so many things that I was taught in my military career or that I experienced in my military career that I didn't take those lessons and say, okay, now I'm going to apply that to my business, or now I'm not going to apply that to, my family life. Like I'd always boast about like, oh man, such a good leader in my military career. And then I'd like turn to my kids and just act like the worst, leader ever. Right. Like I'm like, how am I not leading my kids the right way, but I could lead this team? And I'm like, oh, it's because they're competent. My kids are not. Like, I just got an incompetent group. I'm like, well, duh, because your kid's, 6 years old. That's why he's not competent. Right. And so it was a struggle for me not to understand situational leadership. Right. And that, it's not just like, hey, this is what you're supposed to do and you just got to do it. And if you don't do it, then there's hell to pay for it. Right. And so, and that's why I say military leaders make some of the best leaders and they also make some of the worst leaders, right? It just really depends.
Every leader has the opportunity to be good or bad. We've both experienced people who have the position of leader because of the rank that they've achieved, but they've got no leadership ability.
Mm-hmm.
We've also been exposed to people who have no rank no leadership by the rank that's on their shoulder or their sleeve or their collar, whatever you want to call it, but they're inherently just natural leaders.
Oh yeah.
And then that everybody needs to understand is if you don't have to have rank to be a leader, but at the same token, just because you have a title or a position, look in the mirror and say, am I leading people or am I just being the rank?
Yeah. Or am I being the person that I would listen to? Like the way I'm coming down on this person, if someone's doing that to me, would I be like, oh yeah, of course? I probably not, right? I'd probably hate that person. And so that was something that, I ended up coming to terms with, but I'll say as a whole, MARSOC has some, I could go on all day about how terrible certain things at MARSOC are, or how I wish this was different or whatever, or even in the Marine Corps. But I'd say the Marine Corps as a whole, I am so proud to be part of the Marine Corps, because when I compare that to some of the other leadership people experience in other branches or in other, work environments, I'm like, I have a solid group of people. Same thing with MARSOC. MARSOC's got its bad things, but I think that's what's great is that if people are complaining about it, it's because people care. And so you're around a lot of people that care about it and want to make it better, and they're actually striving to make it better. And so, and I had so many amazing leaders that looked out for me too during my transition process, trying to help me out. And people give all these horror stories like, oh, my command wasn't there for me and whatever else. I always question that, because at the same time, I think a lot of people are looking for someone to blame. A lot of veterans, and I might get a lot of hate for saying this, a lot of veterans are professional victims, and it sucks. There are a lot of things I blame. I even was like, oh, man, I wish my command didn't do this or whatever. And then I look back, I'm like, well, did I really take the time and put as much effort, or was I expecting someone else to do it for me? Or nobody told me this, but did I take the time to be like, well, let me look, I have a question. Google's free. I can look this up. Right. And I'm expecting someone else to just give me the answers rather than me going out and searching for it myself.
The downfall to government work is we get ingrained. I'll even kind of loosely use that union mentality, because my dad worked in unions my entire time growing up. And there are that segment within there that they understand their job is secure. whether they come to work and drink a cup of coffee all day and get the minimal amount of work done. And what ends up happening is that becomes a culture within that organization of, I don't have to do much. But then when you are called upon to do something, or you're doing the absolute minimum, and then you put in for selection to MARSOC or whatever, I didn't get it. It's their fault. Yeah. No, it's your fault. Yeah. You didn't get something because all you did was the absolute minimum.
Yeah. And, you know, and I hear a lot of vets complain because they'll say like, I didn't have this opportunity, you know, for this program, or I didn't know about it, or whatever it is, right? I'd say for any veteran that's transitioning out there, if there's anything, I'm talking like any freaking thing that you're like, I wonder if there's a veteran program for X category. Go to Google and say veteran programs for X category, like whether it's horseback riding or learning to fly a plane or whatever it is, crocheting. Like, I'm telling you, there's a veteran organization for it. And if there's not one, hey, here's an opportunity for you to create one if you're so passionate about it, right? And so I went down the line and with a buddy of mine, and we're like, let's just Google, like just see how many veteran programs out there. The nonprofit space for veteran programs, and even federal programs, like grants out there for just like government programs that are available for vets for these different things, right? You want to start a business or you want to, you know, do whatever, right? There's a program that'll help you transition to that thing, whether it's nonprofit or on the government side. and to me, it's just amazing when someone goes, oh man, I failed. I tried to do this and there was no help for me to do it. It's like, well, one, stop relying on other people, right? We talk about being so resilient as veterans and we could overcome all this stuff, whatever. But then when it comes to our transition, we're like, oh, why doesn't everyone do this for me? It's like, well, you were so resilient here. You're so resilient on the battlefield and we're so resilient going through all this training, all this tough stuff. But then when it comes to like, now you got to switch to something else. Now you're like, oh, please, everybody do something for me. It's crazy, right? It's like we victimize ourselves. And I victimized myself too. You know, I expected people to look out for me and things to, you know, for something to fall into place for me. And when it didn't happen, I was like, shoot, like, is it the government's fault or is it my fault? It's more so my fault.
Before we go down the path of your business success, failures, whatever you want to refer to it, I want to give you the opportunity for at least a little humble brag. I saw something you posted recently on social media about your daughter and at the Ronald Reagan Museum. What kind of award was she getting? And is she going down a route of interest in politics or?
So I am grateful for my family has had a tremendous opportunity to be part of like a homeschool community group for a really long time, right? So like we know just from experience growing up in Southern California that the California school system isn't that great, right? And I'd say public school across the board in the US isn't that great, right? The Department of Education has a lot of shortfalls. And I'm grateful that I made enough income that allowed my wife to never have to really work. And so she was able to homeschool the kids. Well, we have these co-op groups that they do amazing type of education programs. They do a lot of like classical education. So they speak Latin and Greek and they go through like Aristotle and Socrates and all the old, you know, classical literature, right? Like from like the Roman times and the Greeks and all that. And so it's like, I look at what she's learning. I'm like, I want to learn that. Like, I want to go back to school, what she's doing and learn this stuff. It's amazing. But one of the opportunities that she had was to be part of these programs through the Young Americas Foundation, through YAF. And they're incredible programs. And it's open to everyone, not just homeschool kids, but it's just a lot of homeschool kids go through it because, especially in California, because most of the homeschool groups, I guess, lean towards a more conservative side. And I could be wrong on the statistic. I'm actually just throwing that out. You know,
well, it's based on what your perception is.
Yeah, just because basically from the people that were there, I was like, okay, like all of them, or most of them were homeschooled. There was only a few that were public schooled. And so I was saying, okay, well, based off of my observation, it just appears that way. But these programs, they run them every year throughout the year, and they go to DC, they go to, you know, the Reagan Ranch, Santa Barbara, and my kids have an interest in wanting to learn more about our government and wanting to understand conservative values and why that's important. And this is where I think my wife has done an amazing job, and where I feel like now me being wherever I am, being there and being present in my kid's life and being able to mentor them and give them wisdom on stuff. I'm like, man, I wish I would have had this when I was a kid. Someone telling me the why behind this, not just here are the rules, here's the rule book, right? Like, here, let me drop a Bible on the table and be like, these are the rules, don't disobey this. Or, you know, here's the law of the school, or here's the law of whatever it is. Everything just seemed like a set of rules. And I was like, I just want to break those rules, rather than why are these rules important? Not even just the rules. Why are these values important? Why is having this outlook on the world different from this other outlook? And use this critical thinking to come up with a logical answer yourself, right? That's another thing I love about it, is my kids learned logic. So they go through a logic class, and they learn how to look at things logically and break down things and how to identify fallacies and arguments. I'm like, I never learned that as a kid. I was making all the dumb arguments as a kid. That's why I was a communist, right? I was like, I was making the dumbest arguments ever. And so, yeah, I'm proud of her. I'm proud of her because she's really grasping those things, and she'll tell me things that I'm like, man, I'm learning from you now. That's why I say, like, I wish I was in that program, because I'm learning and grasping concepts from my daughter now.
We screw up as parents, as every parent has probably screwed up. The idea of raising your kids, and we've already kind of talked about this, like with the whole millennial thing, but raise your kids to ask why. Mm-hmm. Raise your kids to think for themselves. The hardest thing is raise your kids to let them make their own life decisions.
Yeah.
Because as parents, what we do is we think we're doing the best for our kids. And where I'm already experiencing this is my kids are now in college. And it was when they were younger, you're going to go to college. You're going to go. Mm-hmm. But never, do you want to go to college? Mm-hmm. What do you think you might want to do with your life? You have this interest? What can you learn about it? Let's see if this is it's that really what we should be doing is just being the bumpers as opposed to the driver of the car.
Yeah. And that's one thing, like I'm so amazed at like I had this idea in my head of what like homeschooling was. And I was like, okay, it's me trying to teach geometry to my kids. And meanwhile, I'm like, I don't know geometry, right? I went to continuation school. and it's not like that at all. There's so many programs and things out there available as a resource. And what I didn't know is that even California offers funding for homeschool families as well. And my son, he was really into like airplanes, right? He's a young kid and he's like, oh, I'm into airplanes. And as a young kid, like most boys are into, like, you see a plane, you're like, oh, cool, right? My son, I was like, well, how can I incorporate your love for airplanes into our homeschool program? And there was classes on aerospace engineering and other things that he was able to take. And then he was able to take flight lessons, and then he flew a Cessna. And he, like 10 years old, actually 9 years old when he flew his first plane. And I'm sitting there, in the back seat of this Cessna plane, and he's got his instructor, and then he's in the seat. And I'm like, okay, like his instructor's going to take off. He's probably going to like hand him the reins and whatever. And then his instructor's got his hands off the thing, and he's like, okay, I need you to pull around here, and then we're going to get here, and then we're going to take off. And I'm like, is he letting my son do this? And I'm like, maybe I shouldn't have gotten this thing, right? So I'm like watching, and I'm like, whoa. And then my son goes, and he takes off, and it's kind of a steep takeoff, on this first go, and then he levels out, and then he's flying. He tells him to do his route. And then I'm like, oh, surely he's not going to let him land it. He does, right? And so I'm like, oh my gosh, my 9-year-old's about to land this plane, right? And it was the most incredible thing, because I was like, well, and just to say, there wasn't the most smoothest landing. It was pretty scary. We came in and landed on one wheel first, but
you didn't have to jump out.
I didn't have to, and we didn't die. But what was amazing, I was like, that's incredible. 9-year-old kid, 10 now, and he flew a freaking airplane. And then I drove him home. So he flew me in a plane, and I'm sitting in the driver's seat, and I'm like, what the hell's going on here, right? So like it was just incredible, and I look at that and say there's so many incredible opportunities for these kids that where now whatever they're passionate about, I could feed into that rather than being like, well, here's just a general education. Hope you figure it out.
And something, when you're telling that story, what jumps out to me is, and I go back to when I was a kid, I'm older than you, but I'm sure there were some aspects of it. Unfortunately, there are some parents who may have put your son in the same position to fly that plane with the instructor and them in the back seat. Unfortunately, though, there are a lot of parents who would have said something from the back seat. Whoa. Is he at... Your job at that point is to rely on the instructor to have control of the plane.
Yeah.
As freaked out as you were, the best thing you could have done for your son was just sit back there and keep your mouth shut. You know, and I think that's something else that a lot of parents today don't. Nobody wants to put their kids in a position, and I know this sounds extreme, he's flying a plane, but I'm using the analogy of get hurt.
Yeah.
You know, let kids go experience life.
Yeah.
You don't need to be on top of them all the time.
Yeah. And that's something I learned later, like after the military, because during my time in the military, I was the helicopter parent. I was like, you know, like hovering around, like making sure they didn't do what they weren't supposed to do. And then I realized later, I was like, oh, maybe that's not the best approach, because I actually kind of made them want to hide what they were doing. Right. And then now give them more freedom, more encouraging. And I'm not saying I'm coddling, but because they definitely get disciplined and they know it. But there's a huge difference in that. And to whereas if you allow that freedom for them to make mistakes, they're going to learn a lot more than when you're just, you know, shielding them from everything and putting the saran wrap on them, you know, the bubble wrap on them. But there's a balance, right? And one of the things that I tried to do is just to give them the tool, like say, hey, here's the tool of how you could help yourself. If you don't use it, you know, this could happen. So I'm going to put you in this situation where it's got some risk involved. Here's the tool to help you. And there you go. Right. And so, it's scary though.
I heard a comedian recently and it was kind of one of those things where you just kind of go, but he's all, when was the last time you saw a kid with a cast?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and again, I don't want to see children just arbitrarily get hurt.
Yeah.
I
no one
get
wants that. Yeah.
But you see the joke memes and all that stuff of the people making fun of the playgrounds now that are all rubberized and you know, the jungle gyms aren't just plain metal anymore where you're you know, searing your hands to them in the middle of the summer. But there is that part of learning. There is that part of you do something stupid, there are repercussions for it.
Yeah.
That we inherently learned as kids.
Yeah. And I think it's just, you know, it comes out of a place of love. And I think that's what's so interesting about like the differences between like even like what we're facing right now in this election, right? Like with on one side of spectrum, you have, you know, the conservatives and then you have liberals and then the far extremes of each one as well. And everything just seems like it's like this huge butting heads. Like one side is evil and this side's like, no, you're the ones that's evil. Like your side's Hitler and this side is, you know, lunatics. Right. And what I have found is actually everyone kind of wants the same things generally. Different courses of action on how to achieve that. But the ultimate goal isn't a sinister thing. The ultimate goal is like peace, prosperity, liberty, and safety, right? Like all those things, people want those things, just different courses of action on how to get there. But the reason why I'm getting to that is I think for our kids, people want our kids to grow and flourish and be productive members of society. But the method on how we want to do that is like, no, I got to shield them completely. Or it's like, and then the far other extreme was like, no, I just got to let them figure it out. Like maybe, you know, and it's like, you got to find that balance. But I think overall, I think as parents, you want the best for your kids. And I think the thing I'm struggling with right now, my daughter's learning how to drive. And that's the one thing I'm like, I want to pass that control to someone else. Because as scary as it was for me to be in the plane with my son, it's scarier for me to be in the passenger seat with my daughter driving a car. Oh man.
For the most part, though, you got to assume that your son flying in the air, another plane's not going to run into him.
Yeah.
It's like
exactly.
when you're in a car, it's like not necessarily your daughter may make a mistake. It's like, oh man, all these cars around me.
That was probably, it's so funny because there's so many things that I felt like I've done in my life that I'm like, oh, this has been a scary situation where I'm like, all right, I'm scared right now. But, I got my team here, but being in that car with my daughter, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to die. And it's so funny because I did not feel that same level of panic with my son in the backseat of that plane. I don't know. It's funny.
Let's go into business. So the last time we talked, Thrash and Raid was relatively new, getting off the ground.
Yeah, it was a couple of years in, yeah.
And unfortunately, no longer. Kind of walk us through what you experienced with that.
Yeah, so, man, sometimes there was moments, if you were to ask me this like last year when it was like kind of freshly just scrubbed off, I would have been a little more bitter about it and like wouldn't want to talk about it. But one of the things about Thrash and Raid, I look back on and say, man, there's moments where just like when we were talking about in the military, like would I do it all over again? There was moments where I look back on it, I'm like, man, I wasted those years of my life, right? Because it's like, I went into debt, I lost friends, I, lost time with my family over something that ended up failing, right? Gained so much out of it. Sorry. I gained so much out of it, an extreme amount of life lessons. And the worst part is a lot of those lessons were things that I already knew to be true, but just kind of needed to figure it out on my own again, right? It's almost like someone tells you like, hey, that stove's hot, like don't touch it. And you're like, yeah, I know, but I'm just going to touch it anyways, and you burn yourself. You're like, crap, they're right, And because I went to business school. I went and got my master's in business, and there was there was lessons that people that had been in business before me had said, don't do this. Or if you're going to do this, consider this. And I was like, you know what, you guys, I know that worked for your business or it didn't work for your business, but you know what? You don't know with Thrash and Raid. Like we're doing pretty well. We're killing it. And we have a totally different model. I'm changing the game, right? Yeah. And so what I will say is that I had some early success. And what I mean by early success is what I did well was start with the why. I wanted to create something that was going to have more purpose than just being in retail. Like anyone could sell something, but I didn't want to just sell a product. I wanted to create that community. I wanted to have people, when they bought something from us, they felt like I'm supporting something that is bigger than just a skateboard company. They're out there helping veterans. They're out there helping kids. They're doing something. They're making people more resilient in their life, right? And we were definitely doing that. We impacted so many people, and even on a small scale level, it seemed big at the time, but relative to everything else I've done, it was a little small. But I'd say there was an intimacy on the level of impact we made. Because with our customers, it wasn't like, oh, you bought something from me, that's it. It was like, you bought something from me and I wanted to maintain contact with you, or I wanted to get to know who my customers were, or I wanted to, when I went to the skate park and I gave away things, I wanted to know the backstory of like why this board is meaningful to you, why I'm giving it to you. The people that I had join my team, I wanted to get to know their lives and I wanted to help them grow. And it just really sucks because there was a lot of poor financial decisions I made because I had my blinders on of like the organizational health and was focused too much on like the people involved, right? I was like, oh, let me focus on these people and like make sure like my customers are happy, make sure the people that are working with me, my team, make sure that they're happy. Meanwhile, like I'm sacrificing so much that the business is like, it's like, if money's coming in and then it's immediately going out because it's like I'm trying to give away too much, it's like a business, you might be doing some good, but it's going to ultimately fail, right?
It almost, in a weird way, it almost sounds like you were the complete opposite of that idea. I'm going to start a business because I want to get rich. Your mission was, I want to start a business that helps people. Oh, wait a minute, but I still need to make money.
I still need to live too. and I said this in the first podcast where I said, my wife was like, hey, Thrash is not a nonprofit, but you're sure running it like it is, right? Like, cause you're not making any money because every dime that you make, it's going somewhere else. And to the point where we got really popular, and then because of the economy, this is over the last 3.5 years, we've seen the economy since 2020. It's had some really rough moments, right? And so I'd say overall, the trend as a whole, doesn't matter what industry it is, retail was suffering, right? So I was trying to think of creative ways to keep our revenue stream going. Nevertheless, I didn't compensate for those changes in revenue. So it's like if I brought on another person and I said, hey, I'm going to pay you for this, and then revenue starts to dive down, most business owners would say,
I have to let you go.
I have to let you go. I can't afford to keep you, or I have to change this in whatever in order to make those cuts somewhere. I didn't. Instead, I said, oh crap, we're losing revenue. I want to continue to pay this person. What else can I do to make money so I could keep him on? Right. And so, since 2020, I was also doing stuff with Defense Strategies Group. And that was kind of on the side. Like, so every weekend or like every couple weekends, I would do something with them. Now I was like, okay, like what other work could I do? And so I said, hey, I'm going to kind of not ignore the business, but say, hey, could you handle this? You handle this. I'm going to work on this. And whether it gets handled or not, who cares? Because I need to make money, right? For my family and for you guys. And so I would go out and work, and I would make this money, and then all that money would go and turn around and just pay my guys. Meanwhile, my wife's like, bro, you're not only not making money from this end, now you're making money over here, but then
it's still going out.
You're going out because you have to pay them. Like, why are you still keeping these people afloat? It got to this point where I was like going into debt. I took out a credit card just to keep a couple employees on. And I was like, okay, I was like, maybe things will get better in a couple months. So for 4 months, I was racking up on this credit card just to keep my team, getting boards flown to them, keep the business going, and to pay the employees. Went into debt for it. And then I got to this point where I said, you know what? I can't do this. Like, the business is done. I'm going to call it quits for right now. At least put it on pause. When I decided to do that, it was almost like you would think there'd be an understanding, like from the guys, like, hey, like, I understand, like, you're like going into debt, you're, whatever. It was the exact opposite. It was like, how can you do this to us? I can't believe it. I was kind of blown away, like almost like how dare you? Like, you don't realize how much I sacrificed in order to pay you money, right? And it's not like I was paying them like this lavish amount, but I was paying what I could to keep them going. Meanwhile, like, my family's not making anything. And it wasn't just that. I even talked to other business owners to get them another job. So I talked to my buddy Tyler, and I was like, hey, could you hire this guy? Because I can't pay him anymore. He's like, sure. So I was like, hey, you could work for him now. I got you another job, and actually it's going to pay more too. Still angry about it. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me, man. So that was a friendship lost. I ended up, the other guy that was working with me, I ended up talking to my other friend, Brent, and I said, hey, you got some other work for us to do? And he's like, yeah. And I said, okay, cool. So I told my other friend that was working with me, I was like, hey, I have work for you. And he was like, cool, I'll happily accept it. He was fine about it. But all that to say, one of the biggest lessons I learned was hire the right people for the job. Don't hire your friends, because in starting a business, you want to see areas grow. And even though someone might be a friend and have good ideas, a business needs business skills to grow, not just like good friendly personalities, right? Like, you might jive with someone, but if let's say you're like, hey, I need you to do marketing. If they don't know a clue about marketing, they either have to learn the skills or you don't hire them, right? Or you hire someone that has those marketing skills or accounting skills or whatever it is in business. Like you need that. And so one of the biggest lessons for me, and I was taught in business school this, hire for skills. Don't hire for your friends, right? Because if your friends don't have those skills, then your business is going to fail.
That's that old analogy. Don't get involved in something financial, money related with family and friends. You know, unfortunately, it takes a really strong friendship to really understand that, hey, this is business first. I'm relying on your friendship. I want to try to help you as your friend, but at the end of the day, it's got to be business first. And it's got to be both sides. You have to be, as a friend, go, I will always try to do as much as I can for you from the business perspective and provide for you.
Yeah.
From their perspective, they also have to give back that same 100% I understand that we're friends, but I will do everything first as your employee.
Yeah. And I think where the resentment came from is they were like, hey, we helped this grow. Like we're part of this company just as much as you are because, you know, we've been a part of it. And I'd say, yes, to an extent, those guys helped the business grow. They were definitely a part of it. But where the line in the sand was, I said, there's a big difference. There's skin in the game. Whereas on a financial side, 100% of it is coming from me. Whereas if you guys were like investors and you had skin in the game, like money in it, then I'd say, okay, a lot of these business decisions could fall on you as well, but they don't because you haven't invested in it other than, your time. But I was like, but unless you want to, you know, continue to work without a paycheck, then we have to end it. Right. And they obviously wouldn't do that. So all that to say is friendships, don't hire someone if they don't fit the role. Right. So, I definitely hired people that were just cool dudes, not necessarily the right fit for the job. So if you're going to start a business, no matter what it is. And then the other thing with it is, they say this mostly about nonprofit stuff and, you know, board of directors and things like that. But they say, like, if you have a garden, right, and your garden starts to have weeds in it, and you're like, oh, that doesn't fit in my garden, I'm going to take that out early. Because if you don't take it out early, it spreads, right? And the same process in business too. If you have someone in the company that's like, hey, they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and it's causing this trickle effect everywhere else where it's causing the business not to do well, well, you got to remove that. And I waited too long to say, you know what? I can't have that. I just was like, you know what? I'm just going to deal with it and just let it go. Right. And that goes even for my own mistakes, the own weeds in my own life where I said, like, instead of focusing on this aspect of the business, I probably could have been focused on this aspect instead. And I recognized too, even at the time, I'm like, you know what? I probably should be doing over here, but this just, you know what? I'm just going to ride this out and do whatever. Can't do that. You have to recognize those trends early and then make that shift.
You also got into a little bit of a legal or kind of a little battle over the name, correct?
Yeah, and it was that was actually the
least of your problems.
Least of my problems, because I say that there was issues in the company even prior to that, but where that I actually wasn't even going to bring that up because to me it almost didn't even. It's actually a godsend in a way because that was like the start of like making me rethink the business. There was another skate company with Raid skateboards, right? And I wish them all success, right? I have nothing against them. When they first reached out to me, they had said, hey, you have the same name or you have the name Raid in your brand. We have the rights to that name. It's trademarked. So you got to change your name. And at first I was like, no, two separate things, like, you know, F off, right? And then obviously they pursued it legally. And I was like, okay, I'll pursue it. Like, I'll fight it, right? So I got a lawyer and paid money for that. And during that process, there was like, it was like the, you know, he said, she said kind of thing where it's like on one end, people were saying, hey, here's Benjie. He copied these guys and took their name and he took their model and he's trying to do everything they're doing. He's a copycat. He's a phony, all this stuff. And then meanwhile, there's my side that's like, no, we support these guys. Like they're totally drastically different in their approach and in the way they market and the way who they are. And the name Raid, it's funny. I have the original of where I came up with the name, and it's because I was like, oh, I'm a Marine Raider. And I was like, and I like skateboarding. So Thrash and Raid, and I like in and out. So I was like, Thrash and Raid, just like in and out, right? And I came up with this design on this back of a notebook, and I was like, oh, cool, that's my company name. And I was like, let me look up to see if anyone else has that name. And I didn't do a good job of it, because what I did is I looked up Thrash and Raid on the Secretary of State site on California.gov. And I was like, oh, look, Thrash and Raid doesn't pop up. That name's good. I looked on Instagram, Thrash and Raid. Oh, okay, cool. There's no other Thrash and Raid. At that time, what I could have done was looked up, is there any other variation of the name? And so this is a lesson learned for those going to business or into business. If you have a name of something, check all the variations. Don't just check the specific name. Check all the variations of that name. And if it's something similar to something else, really consider your options. Like, hey, maybe I should, that goes with a logo, with anything, right? Is there something that's going to potentially cause some type of
conflict of interest,
right? In any way, right?
Especially if you're operating in the same business space.
Exactly. And so I could admit and say, like, I made that mistake. I definitely didn't steal the name from somebody. Because if I would have saw that there was a Raid SB early on, I would have been like, oh, okay, I probably should pick a different name. And I kind of wish I did, because now I look back on the name, I'm like, that's a dumb name. Like, in my mind, a lot of people say
I'm throwing away the sweat hoodie.
A lot of people say they really liked it, but like as the years went on, I was like, man, I wish I would have picked something different. But to me, I was like, the name doesn't freaking matter. What matters is like what we're doing, right? And that's what mattered. But the reason why I said it was a godsend that they sent that cease and desist, because it kind of got that ball rolling of me like rethinking, like, okay, is this business really what I want to do? And all that. And we ended up losing the case. We ended up trying to change our name. And then, obviously revenue was going down at that time, even before then. And it was almost like it gave the green light, like that name change thing kind of gave the green light to say, hey, Benjie, like, this is your opportunity to just get out. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, that's it. I'm done. And what was holding me back from doing that was my own pride. I had this pride, like, no, because if I do that, then it's going to show that this company won. And then, I'm a failure in business. And then everyone's going to be like, oh, look he quit and, he's a loser. Like, I'm telling myself this, right? No one's telling me this. This is me telling myself this.
Sometimes pride is a terrible thing to have.
It was. So I had this huge ego telling me, like, you can't give up, because then people are going to think you're a failure, rather than you can't give up because it's the right thing to do to keep going and all this. Thrash and Raid it was making a cool difference, but it's not like it was like, I wasn't shutting down like a children's hospital or something. It's a skateboard company, right? So me shutting down a skateboard company, it wasn't going to really cause that big of an issue. In fact, it saved me, because now I wasn't spending money on people and things that wasn't making money and helping my family out in any way.
Not to over generalize it, but it's, hey, attack that hill. We keep losing guys. We're in from this angle, trying to come up from the bottom. We're at a disadvantage, but yet we just keep there comes a point where you're like, we need to call in an airstrike because we can't do it this way.
Yeah. And that's the thing about business. Like, you got to figure out when to pivot. And the other thing I'd say that I did wrong in business as well is I got into skateboarding because I said, it's not like I didn't get into business to make money. I got into business to make a difference, right? At the same time, you have to make money in order
to make a difference,
right? And so, but what I screwed up in is I looked at, like, what do I like, right? And I was like, I like skateboarding. All right, let me figure out how to just do that for a living. But if I wanted to if you want to be successful in business, and successful as in like make money, grow a company and keep it going, if I wanted to just have like a side project, the skateboarding industry, great. There's something called Porter's 5 Forces that I went into in business, and it looks at an industry, whether it's your company or the industry as a whole, it looks at it from these 5 different forces and says, okay, critique it. You know, what is the buying power? What are the buyers and suppliers power that they have? How easy is it to replicate your business? Like all these different things. And I didn't really do that with the skateboarding industry or my company. I just was like, I'm just going to run with it. But if I had done that early, I would have said, you know what? This industry probably isn't what I want to get into. It's like someone going, you know what I want to do? I want to create an airline. Like, how many airlines are there? There's a lot. And it's not easy to jump into the airline industry. It costs a lot and the market's saturated with it, right? It's not easy to replicate that. And so I looked at the skateboarding industry as just like, oh, I just want to do it. I didn't look at how saturated the market was and what the demand was for it. The demand for skateboards is actually pretty low. And the supply for it is extremely high. So
culturally, are you seeing are less and less younger kids coming into skateboarding, or is it still kind of maintaining
It's steady. I'd say it's steady. And in a way it's growing. It's growing in certain other countries. In the US, it's kind of steady. In other countries, it's growing significantly. In Brazil and Japan and a lot of other places in the world, it's growing. But what I will say is that where the market is saturated is like, you got like, I mean, every day there's probably a new skateboard company popping up, right? Some mom and pop, or, you know, just some guy in his garage creating a company. Where people have the stranglehold is on like the big main brands, right? And unless you have this distribution company, your chances of like getting into this position is extremely low. Same thing for being a pro skater. Like there's gone are the days where it's like you're found somewhere and you're like, okay, I'm going to be this like unique pro that is unlike anybody else. You go to any skate park in the US, you see these guys skating, you're like, holy crap, that must be a pro. Like, oh, nope, that's just some kid that's really freaking good, right? Because the bar is set so high, and these pros, they make like no money. So before in my head, I'm like, oh yeah, Tony Hawk and Steve Caballero, like all these guys are probably killing it with money and fame and all this stuff. Some of those early on guys, yeah, Ryan Sheckler and these guys that get these other deals with like Red Bull and whatever else. But when it comes to just purely skateboarding, like a board sponsoring you, you're making like nickels. Right. I was talking to one of the guys, we did this event at OC Ramps, and like all these pros that are just like incredible riders. I'm like, wait, you work for FedEx? Like, why are you working for FedEx? You're a pro. And it's like, dude, I don't make any money. I'm making like $100 a month on these boards. And I still have to work at FedEx in order just to like get by. And they're driving some like jalopy that's like, you know, backfiring on their way in. And I'm like, what the heck? You know, and that kind of like clicked in my head, like, oh my gosh, this industry is not really the industry where, you know, you're going to like grow. I'm not going to grow this thing and just become this huge success because my market niche is so minuscule.
Well, and it's also an industry that for the most part doesn't really have a big market cap to it. You're not going to see a commercial for a skateboard on TV, you know?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah.
You mentioned Tony Hawk. Tony Hawk has, and I'm taking nothing away from him, but so much of what he probably makes today and continues to make is his brand.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to him actually out on a board skating.
Yeah, exactly. And because there's like the nostalgia behind who Tony Hawk is. Right. I say I feel bad saying that because it's not like he's that old, and he's killing it for how old he is, right? Like most people, when you tell someone you skate at that age, they're like, what the hell's wrong with you, right? But people know Tony Hawk. Even if you don't skate, you know the name.
Correct.
Right? And so you could easily, that's like Michael Jordan, right? Like everyone, you don't even have to watch basketball to know who Michael Jordan is, right? And so it's like with Tony Hawk, Michael Jordan, these guys, there's already money to be made behind.
But equally so, name the number 2 guy. And nobody would know anybody beyond Tony Hawk.
Yeah, exactly.
Outside of the skateboard community.
Exactly. And that's not and I'm not taking anything away from him. Like he's freaking incredible. He earned that right to be among the Michael Jordan of skateboarding. Yeah, he earned that for sure and beyond. But what I mean by what I didn't like about the skateboarding culture was there's a lot of preach about acceptance and community and all this, and it's there on the smaller end. You see people lifting each other up and helping one another and all that, but it's also very cutthroat, and it's also an industry where people expect handouts. And I say that because, like, in order for your company to, like, the people that like companies, like a lot of the kids, they're like, oh, we like these companies because they're always giving away stuff, or they're always whatever. And so it becomes like you expect it now. And so if you're not out there giving stuff away, you're like, oh, you're just someone who wants to make money. And you're like, well, I need to in order to freaking like survive, dude. And so it kind of like re-shifted my brain a little bit, where I was like, hey, I'm here to do this. But at the same time, now it's like people are expecting it, where it's like, if I show up and I'm not giving away boards today, they're like, piss off. I'm like, really? Like, I'm at this event, I've given away like 100 boards, like, you know, this last couple months, and now I show up and it's like, oh, you're not giving away anything today? All right, well, piss off. You know, you're like, wow, okay. So that turned me away from the skate community, and also just the depravity of like just that the culture too. It just reminded me of like just being in high school, of just like excessive drinking, drug use, you know, just rebel just to rebel for the sake of rebellion.
Yeah, what are you rebelling for? I don't know.
I just want to do it. Yeah. And so, and I found myself actually kind of even going down that rabbit hole, where I was like, I felt myself, I was like, man, am I becoming kind of like this little shit, where it's like, I liked being part of the scumbag culture, and I was like, that's not who I am. And there was this one point where I had hopped this fence of this school in San Diego, and me and a couple of the guys that we skate with, we were there. And this lady comes out and she's like, you piece of shit kids, like, get the hell out of here. And I'm not, you know, I'm 30 something, you know, and she called me a kid. She's like, get the hell out of here. You know, it's people like you that's a problem with this world and blah, 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 this. And I'm like, and I'm flashing back in my head to like me briefing the US ambassador to Yemen and talking about like strategic actions like to take in this country. And I'm like, there was a point where I was doing this, and now I just hopped this fence of the school to go skate, and I'm getting called like a piece of crap, you know? And I'm like, wow, where is my life going right now? So
for anybody who has or does follow you on social media, the one thing that you definitely are a character, and you like to act and perform, and you've some amazing videos. And one of the ones that immediately jumps out to me is you basically redoing, you know, When You're a Jet, and you're dancing around in your leather jacket, you know, and it's just your ability to mock and make fun of yourself, and led into you getting to work with Black Rifle Coffee.
Yeah.
What's going on with Later Skater and all of that production side of things?
Yeah. So actually Chris and I we parted ways actually this year, earlier in this year. And Later Skater, so he was working with me with TNR, and then I said, hey, let me contact Softfleet, because I know that they're trying to hire someone to be a videographer and to do content. So I said, hey, Brent, I know Chris is doing this. He's doing a fantastic job. You've always said you liked it. Could you do some work for Softfleet? So that's how that got going. Later Skater Productions kind of morphed into doing stuff with TNR to now I'm doing, or TNR Thrash and Raid, to now I'm doing stuff with Softfleet. And then from Softfleet, we got other people like Mac Belts and PSC Bows and all these other folks coming up saying like, hey, we want to work with you guys. And it was great. Where I had, and I said, I had a lot of fun doing it. And it was. It
on the finished product of what you get to see looked like it was very fun.
It was a lot of fun. Like the behind the scenes stuff was very fun. Like us just filming was a really good time. Chris is an extremely talented, like from just the camera work to directing to script writing to just all the post-production stuff. Like he did the bulk of that. Like my contribution to it was just like, hey, I could sing and dance and act in it, and I could write some scripts. But as far as like on the production side, like he was doing it, right? And he does an amazing job and still does to this day. Where I had a disconnect from it, or why I chose to disconnect from it, was because I still felt like I wanted to do more than just get validation from social media. And you know, it was cool to work with Black Rifle. Those guys are funny to work with. It's actually hard to keep up with those guys. They're so wired on coffee. Maybe that's what it is. But it's like the whole time I'm there, I'm like, had this smile on my face is hurting. And I'm like, oh, I just want to go home right now, because it's like trying to keep up with their energy. But They're amazing guys to work with, and I had a lot of fun. But at the end of the day, I was like, what am I doing this for? Am I doing this because, yeah, I'm making money, I'm having fun, that meaning and purpose like I used to have, where I was like, where I felt like I was making a true difference. At MARSOC, I was like, I'm making a true difference. Even with Thrash and Raid, and I was helping the kids out and helping vets with 6 feet above and all that, like, it felt like there was like this meaning and purpose behind it. And I started to kind of get like a little bit depressed, and where I was like, man, I just feel like there's something in my life missing. And I feel like I'm just not contributing like the way I used to. And I think part of it started from was when that lady was like, you piece of crap, you know? And I'm like, I used to do this and now I'm doing this. And it's like, it just doesn't hold the same weight. And I know a lot of vets deal with that in their transition, you know, from being whatever they were to, you know, their civilian job. A lot of police officers as well, first responders as well. And so I had this opportunity. I talked to my buddy Mike O'Dowd from Defense Strategies Group, and I was like, hey man, like, if there's any other work that you have, you know, to help me out, you know, because they were doing great things, working, doing executive protection for folks overseas and things like that. And he's like, hey, I got a role for you. So I plugged in there. And so I was still working with Later Skater, like bouncing back and forth between DSG and Later Skater. And where eventually I was like, you know what? I can't work with Later Skater anymore. It's not fulfilling me. I just don't like the person I'm becoming because what I'm doing is I'm seeking validation from others, and I'm seeking like the social media likes. That's my driving factor. I was like, I don't want to be that. I'd rather be driven towards wanting to help and make a difference somewhere else.
What's rattling around in my head right now is the song saying, what do you want? Tears of a Clown. And where I'm going with that is, yes, I enjoyed seeing the funny videos, and you are a character, and I always put a little bit of, but I know Benjie kind of behind the scenes, having had the opportunity now to sit and talk with you for a couple times now. And obviously the connection that we've made over the last several years and staying in contact, I always kind of put that behind you being the character, and I can see now when you explain it that it doesn't drive you. You know, I don't want to be the monkey clapping the tambourines, because all of a sudden that's who you are. Nobody knows anybody but Benjie, the guy dressed up as in the wig, and you almost become a character of yourself.
Yeah. And it was actually another thing that it kind of struck me was like, I had mentioned, so I made a post about something, and afterwards somebody was like, wow, you were very articulate. Did you use GPT? They're like, did you use ChatGPT to write that? And I was like, I was a little bit insulted, because I was like, well, you don't think I'm smart enough to like write just a couple paragraphs in a post about something, about how I felt on the subject? And it made me realize, I was like, people see me as a certain way. They see me as like, oh, Benjie the goofball, like he's like out there singing and dancing and, you know, whatever. Whereas, is that how I want to be portrayed? Yeah, I don't mind people enjoying my, you know, goofy side, because I have a goofy side for sure. But actually, when I was doing some work, when I was bouncing between DSG and Later Skater, I taught a CQC class with DSG. And one of the guys that was in the class was like, hey, I follow you on social media, right? And I'm like, oh, cool, you know, when I first met him. We get through the class and everything. And at the end, he goes, you know, I was actually kind of disappointed in meeting you. He's like, because you didn't really joke at all during the class. And I was like,
it's not a joking situation.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm teaching CQC here, right? And he's like, yeah, no, he's like, I don't mean that in a bad way. He's just like, it's just, you know, you're just very serious right now. And it's like, you didn't, you know. And I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? Like,
do you think Bozo the Clown was going to be running through this?
Like, I was like, I don't know what you thought, you know? And so to me, it was almost like, yeah, there was like this expectation that like, oh, here comes Benjie. Like any second now, he's going to like tell us a joke. And, you know, meanwhile, like that's what I was portraying on social media. It was just like, hey, I'm just this guy that's just, you know, living life, you know, and having a good time. And when in reality, like what they didn't see was like just the struggles and like all the other things that I'm dealing with and everything else. And I was like, you know what? I want that to end. Like, I'm done with that.
It's almost, I would imagine, to a degree, it's like you becoming an actor, a full-time
Yeah.
actor, because people will only know you by the roles that get portrayed on the TV, big screen, whatever you want to say. And when then they meet those people in real life, you're like, well, you're not, but that was a character I was playing.
Exactly. Oh, jeez. Yeah, exactly. And there was other reasons why I wanted to leave, but that was one of the biggest ones was the purpose driven was the biggest issue. And then obviously how I was betraying myself. And then the third was what I was getting out of it. Am I just seeking this because I want social media likes? Because it feels good, right? Like when someone watches your video and you're like, hey, I got like 100,000 views on this, or I got 1 million on this, whatever. Like it feels good. Like it feels good to have that. But at the same time, I'm like, if that's what I'm chasing, then it go, like Jamie Thomas, he's another professional skater that I looked up to. He had said something to me where he said, it's fleeting. It's like this fleeting happiness, right? It's where it's like you see it and you're like, oh, that's great. And then it's like people go, oh, that was cool. Like, yeah, comment, next. And then that thing you did is gone forever. Like they might reference it maybe like some other time, but even in skateboarding, that cool trick you did. Oh man, amazing. You landed that trick. Good for you. All right, next.
Yeah.
Like what's the next thing, right? Like that moment is so fleeting. And if I'm just constantly chasing that, then that's meaningless.
And to a degree, we in our communities kind of do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
We leave these professions, but we constantly live on the before. Well, I used to. And unfortunately, part of that transition is kind of closing that door and saying, yeah, I used to do that, but here's what I do now. Here's where I'm going forward. Every once in a while, you can open up the door, pull a story out.
Yeah.
But so many of them you see that door and they're further and further and further from it, but they're still, you remember?
Yeah, exactly.
With the flip and being more serious in your content, it really kind of seems though that you're getting the opposite side now. It's like, hey, instead of being the fun Benjie guy, you're like, we don't like you. I mean, you look at, I see a lot of your posts where people are not friendly.
Yeah, people, I know, because especially there was a lot of people that were like, I used to like you a lot. And now, like, you're dead to me, right? Like, I was like, okay, cool. And actually, one guy even said, he's like, how can someone that knows how to kickflip believe the things that you believe? Because everyone just assumed, they're like, oh, you're a California guy that skateboards? Like, you must be, like, ultra left-leaning. And I'm like, well, no, I'm not. Like, I'm not ultra left-leaning. I think there was some things that it's weird, because I always considered myself a liberal before. Like I said, like, in high school, I was a communist, right? There were areas of my life where I'd say, even today, where I'm like, it would be considered left-leaning decades ago. And now it's considered like you're in the far right if you believe like boys are boys and girls are girls, right? Like that's like an outrageous thing to say now. Whereas before it's like, oh, that's just, it's common knowledge, right? But it's interesting because like on environmental issues and things like that, I wouldn't say left-leaning, but I tend to lean a certain way than the other. So I think with the way people are they expect you to follow along party lines on everything. And they expect that if you don't believe exactly what I believe on this side, then you must be the enemy, right? And whereas before, what I had said earlier in this podcast, I said, I think most people aren't sinister. Some people are. There definitely are people that are sinister. But I think for most people, they want freedom. They want opportunities for others. They care about, like people say like, oh, you don't care about the poor, or you don't care about, the well-being of, you don't empathize with people that are struggling in this country. And I'm like, no, I definitely do. It's just, I just don't think the course of action you want to take is the best approach for them. Right. And so, and I think we've come to this point in our lives now where it's like people just can't have a conversation anymore. We just say, you know what, I'm just going to not talk about it. And therefore it's fine. Or I'm like, no, I think we should talk about it. We should talk more now.
Without going down a huge rabbit hole on this, but you can sit there and say, oh, and you made the comment earlier, I hate feeling like I'm that old guy, get off my lawn. Mm-hmm. But there are parts of my childhood that I would love to bring back.
Mm-hmm.
there are aspects of daily life where just because you and I don't disagree or agree doesn't mean I hate you, doesn't mean I can't have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
But it's gotten to the point today that if you disagree with the way I think, then you're basically saying you want to kill me and you don't like me.
Yeah.
Nobody has the ability just to kind of go, this is what I think, this is what you think, because I honestly do believe if you could take the media out of it and just let everybody live their life, you'd be surprised that probably 99% of us live in the middle of the road.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's the media that drives this fuel and this fire. You talk about, boys are boys and girls are girls. That's basic common sense. But it seems like common sense has gone out the window. I think back to when I was a kid, and there were those times where I dressed up like a cowboy and I thought I was a cowboy. But when it came time to go outside, my dad or my mom would go, take that garbage off. You're not going to the store in your pajama pants, your cowboy boots, Yeah. It's like there comes a point in time where you have to be a parent. You have to encourage and help your kids grow. But at the same token, if your kid thinks they're a dinosaur, they're not a dinosaur.
Yeah, and I think that's where I said I think a lot of people have really good intentions, and good intentions, could lead to the wrong way too. And where I think where people believe that discipline and accountability equals like hate on one end, it's love on the other, right? And so where it's like, oh, we should encourage someone, even if there's something that might be unhealthy for their life, we should just let them do it because, it'd be mean if we told them something else, right? And I look back as like when I was using drugs, right? Like I was smoking meth. And I had some people in my life that would tell me, hey, you idiot, don't do that. And they weren't saying that because they, I don't know, were looking out for themselves. They were looking out for me, right? They loved me enough to tell me, don't smoke meth. It's not good for you, right? And then there's people that were enablers that were like, you know what? Hell yeah, smoke meth. I won't do it, but it's okay if you do. Those people, they don't truly care about you. Those enablers that are like, yeah, like do it. Like you're harming your life, but that's okay. Like I still love you. You don't really love me if you're seeing me, if you see me like about to pull the trigger on a gun in my head and you're like, well, that's his life. He's going to do it. Like you don't love me, right? Someone would stop you. You'd stop someone from doing that. And so that's where I think today with a lot of things that we think were common sense, I think a lot of it's skewed where it's like they don't see the path of destruction the way living this certain way leads. But I think over time we've seen since the 1960s choices that we've made that are more far left leaning have big consequences, right? And having a wide open border has big consequences, and it's a trickle down effect into everything, right? And so being more serious on these topics and talking about these more on social media and being more open about it, obviously, if someone has read through the dialogues I've had with people, for the most part, I've been very open and engaging with folks, and I invite the engagement because I think it's a lost thing that people cannot just have these conversations anymore. People just, what is it? Ad hominem. It's like the Latin phrase for like attack the man, right? Like people attack each other rather than attacking the argument. And that's just one of the huge fallacies we have today.
I know for me in following you, it was, I don't want to use the word refreshing, but I really enjoyed seeing some of your posts. You just got done with a run. You'd be on your camera like, hey, just basically go out and live your life as good as possible. Do a little bit, just that typical positive message. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's the Benjie that I believe I know,
mm-hmm.
And it's kind of sad to see that when you start showing the real you, the negative that comes from it.
Yeah. And I think people forget the motives behind things. And I try to, and that's why I could empathize a lot with a lot of people that are on the very conservative side, look at a lot of liberals and they go, you freaking idiots. Whereas I don't look at it that way. I think some decisions are dumb, but I also say like, I think they come from a genuine place. Like they care about the homeless. They care about people coming across the border. They care about these things and they empathize in a very loving way. Where I disagree with is on the methods and how they want to help, right? And so when it comes to people hating on me for doing certain things, like me going overseas and going to Israel, for example, I didn't go to Israel to go tell a bunch of IDF like, hey, here's how you kill more Palestinians. I went over there and said like, this is how you stay safe and this is how you prevent civilians from getting killed. These are tactics and these are methods that you could use in order to mitigate risks, to mitigate casualties among each other, and to positively identify threats rather than just going into a building and indiscriminately shooting or not deconflicting with who's in a building before you drop air support, things like that, right? And so people, all people saw was, hey, look, he's over there. He's supporting genocide. He's supporting this and this and that. And I'm like, you don't know anything about the motives of why I'm there or who I'm helping and their motives as well. I found it extremely just polar opposite of what the media was portraying about certain people within the IDF and within on the ground, the soldiers and the Kitat Kananutes, the security guys in these communities. They make it seem like people are out there and just can't wait to just like put their boot on the neck of somebody when it's not like that at all. It's like the exact opposite. It's almost like I just want to live in peace. I don't want this war to keep going. I'm trying to keep my guys safe, my community safe. I want them to prosper and to be safe. What's preventing that from happening? Right? That's what you got to focus on. And so, and you could hate on a government all you want. I could disagree with the politics of Ukraine, or I could disagree with the politics of Russia, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to empathize or feel like I shouldn't want to help, care for the people that are caught in the crossfire of it. Right. My love for humanity and for the betterment of people isn't going to prevent me from going over somewhere just because there's some political sensitivity involved in it.
Did, along those lines of going to Israel to help, to teach, to consult, was that something you went looking for, or was that just an opportunity that kind of came your way?
Yeah, it was an opportunity that, so with DSG, I started working with this family, and an amazing family. And there was an opportunity to help this group in Israel, right? And so they said, hey, I'd like you to go to Israel to help, just bring some stuff over, right? And I said, okay, yeah, no worries. When I did that, I reached out to my buddy Chad Robichow, who he was part of that the huge rescue operation Saving Aziz, and they're making that motion picture now of that rescue operation. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, do you know anybody that's operating in Israel? Because if something goes south while I'm there, because this is right after October 7th, I was like, if something goes south while I'm there, who can I contact that can help me out? And he's like, hey, I know a guy, Mark, Marine. He's going over there. He's been going over there for a long time. Here's his info. So I linked up with him, and he's like, yeah, man, we've been going over here. We've been helping a lot of people. We're doing things that, no one else is doing. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. And here's the caveat. He's like, you're not going to get paid to go here. We're just going over there because we want to do it. And I was like, perfect. Because those are the people that really care and are really trying. Like, they're not going over there because it's a paycheck. These are people that are going over there because they want to make a difference. I was like, I want to be around those people.
Is this the same group that you just went to Florida with?
Yes. Yeah. So the Overwatch Foundation. And what's amazing is I got to work with one of my buddies, Zach. Him and I deployed to the Philippines together. We also deployed to Yemen together, and bringing him into the fold and going to Israel now a few times, and then, going over to Florida to help with hurricane relief efforts. It was nice to just be around members of my old team again, but then also just to be around soft guys that are just like wanting to make a difference and wanting to make a huge impact in the world.
How long has the organization been around?
Since 2022 is when they officially started, but I think in 2021 there was a hurricane. I can't remember if it was Ida or it was a different one, Irene maybe. Oh no, there was a one of the hurricanes had hit Florida. And so Mark had said, hey, I'm going to go over there. This pre-organization forming, went over there to help. Then the Afghan withdrawal happened. He went over there to help. And then Ukraine kicked off and he went over to Ukraine and he's like, all right, now let's officially form this organization. Before it was just a group of guys that just would bounce around, wanted to help. And they were doing it for free. So now the organization is, more structured, still not getting paid to do it, but I enjoy it because I make enough now with DSG that I could volunteer my time to go and do things that I love.
For somebody who's are they only looking for military veterans in this group? Or are they looking for assistance from anybody who would want to help out, to your knowledge? Yeah,
actually, we do have a couple civilians that help out on the team as well. And I think the big difference for us is like, we do want to give, it's like the purpose of the mission is twofold, right? We want to give veterans a home so that way they could feel like they have that meaning and purpose again in their lives to go out and help others, whether it's, CONUS, like here in the United States, or, OCONUS, like overseas, helping somewhere, right? So that's part of the mission, is helping the veterans, but then also the other part is just making that impact where it's needed most, right? And going places where most people aren't willing to go, right? A lot of people are like, I don't want to go to Gaza, or I don't want to go to the West Bank, right? Or I don't want to go to Ukraine. Like, most people aren't willing to do that. But there's a certain breed of guys that are, and they are willing to go. And I think back of, in Isaiah, right? He's like, whom shall the Lord send? Like, send me, right? Like, that's how I've always felt about, even prior to me being religious in any way. I always thought, if I have the capability and I have the knowledge, the skills, and this time that I could go, it's allotted, it's free for me to go and do something, and I don't do it. Why? It's because I'm just, I'm like, someone else will do that. But who's going to do it, right? And so I say, well, if I have the capability to go, and let's say I needed the help and someone else had the capability, I would wish that person would come and help. Right? I wish that person would come help my family. So I want to be that person to someone else. And I remember the first time I had went over to Israel to help my son. I had just gotten, I was going all over the world. I had gone to Amsterdam, to London, to South Africa, all these places during that month. And then at the end of the month, it's going to Israel. And when I had gotten home for a couple of days, my son hands me a note right before I leave. And it just simply read, "Don't go to Israel." And I was like, oh, man, like, hit hard, because I was like, I don't want to go. Because he was like, I want to spend time with you, man. And, obviously I ended up going. But when I got there, and after we had been helping these guys out, the soldiers were coming up to me, like tears in their eye, hugging me and crying and saying, like, I'm so glad you're here, because we just feel abandoned by the world. Like, everyone's looking at us like we're like these baby killers, and they don't realize that, like, what we're going through and this pain that we're going through, they're not seeing that. All they're seeing is this side. They're not seeing the other side of it. And so with tears in their eyes, they're thanking me, and I'm like, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm here, because I'm making a difference in these guys' lives.
You've done several trips into Africa too.
Yes.
Motorcycle trips, or
into Namibia. Yeah.
Did you get to take your son to one of those?
I did. Yeah. It was really cool. I was helping with DSG, with Defense Strategies Group. We were partnered with this group called Freshline, and they were going, they go all over the world. Amazing group. So, and they're just looking for people that want to go out and adventure. And when I say adventure, I'm talking like true adventure, like where it's like, hey, your route isn't necessarily planned, and like, you don't know exactly where you're going to stay, but you go out into like the middle of like somewhere in, Guatemala, or, into Mongolia, or wherever it is. And you're like, let's figure it out. Let's get on a bike and just like go. And that's why it's called Fresh Line, because you're creating a fresh line somewhere that no one's ever been. And you might be relying on local support. Your bike is going to break down. You're like, people are going to get injured potentially. Right. And so it's like a true adventure. And so we were doing that in Namibia, and we were helping get a lot of these guys that are going to lead the expeditions. It was like a leadership course. It was like an expedition, like boot camp. Right. So Mike and I, we would rotate, and we would switch out every other month. And we'd teach these guys like mission planning, how to look at things from like a special operations perspective, all the contingency stuff, things that like we think of just naturally because of like our background. But like the normal person, you're like, why wouldn't you think of this? Like people go to Africa in the middle of the desert and they're like, all right, like, let's go and let's just hop on our bike and go. And you're like, well, where's the nearest hospital? Like, what if someone gets hurt? And they're like, oh, we'll just call 911. It's like, well, how do you know your cell phone's going to work? They're like, well, we don't. It's like, well,
where are you going to get gas?
Yeah, exactly. Like there's all like, what if a bike breaks down? They're like, oh shit. Like, so it's like, there's these things that people don't think of and they just go and do it. And then they wonder like, oh, I wish I would have planned this out better. Right. And, but that's just how the rest of the world works. Right.
So DSG is definitely growing.
Yeah. DSG is growing a lot. And that's to, Mike O'Dowd, prior Navy SEAL, he's done an incredible job at relationship building and growing that company.
I didn't see the episode, but it was his team or his company and you guys that were on with Stallone and his daughter's trip. Were you on?
Yeah.
Because I know Angel got on that episode.
Yeah, no, I was in Africa during that time. What was cool about that and just about what DSG's doing, which is unique compared to a lot of these other tactical companies, is we're based in Beverly Hills. So we're like the only special operations group in that area. And most people look at California in general, but it's particularly LA as like, that ain't a market. Like ain't nobody's interested in guns and tactics and all that. You'd be surprised. And because of that, a lot of our clients, we have a high end product. And so we cater that to a high end individual, right? So, high value type of people, right? And so whether that's celebrities or high net worth individuals, like that's who we cater to. And I think it's amazing that he was able to see that and then, eventually get on the Family Stallone reality show and all the other folks that we've been able to help, opening up a new location in Beverly Hills, where it's open 5 days a week. People come in, and we've partnered with a company called Arley Arms who makes weapons. And so it's cool. It's like a one-stop shop. People go in there, buy custom weapons, get training, and then, yeah, it's incredible.
You got to go to Paris for the Olympics.
Yeah, I went to Paris on an executive protection detail for a high net worth family. Yeah, and that's the other thing too. I mean, there's two sides of DSG. There's the training side, and then there's the executive protection side. And again, with executive protection, it's high net worth clients that we're assisting. We're not doing security like at the mall.
Right.
We're not doing like security outside of a retail store. It's particularly tailored towards protecting and assisting a high net worth client.
For somebody who might be thinking about executive protection work when they come out, whether first responder or veteran, what advice can you give now that you've been doing it for a bit?
I'd say really look at the company and look at like, okay, is this company just throwing me out there to anybody, or like what are my, I guess, what's expected of me, right? And if you're just a knucklehead or not a knucklehead, but like a knuckle dragger, that's just like, hey, you're expected to just be a bodyguard, and like that's all you are. It's just like stand there with a gun and just boom, just don't ask questions. To me, that's not EP work. There's a big difference between being a bodyguard and being an EP. So if you're expected to just be that and just to be some static line position, some people like that. It's an easy job. EP work is more of like a thinking man's game. You're planning routes ahead of time. You're doing threat vulnerability assessments ahead of time. You're figuring out what are ways I can mitigate risk and keep the client safe before anyone even gets to me, right? A lot of the stuff that I do, like in Paris and a lot of the other places where we travel to overseas, I'm not necessarily next to the client at all. And the client might not either look like someone that has security with them. I'm in everyday clothes, like what I'm wearing right now, or, obviously I'm not going to wear some like tactical green shirt, but I'll be.
Your job is to blend in.
To blend in, and I'll be across the street at a cafe. Meanwhile, I have eyes on them, right? And that's it. Takes a certain type of person to be able to do that and be mature enough to do that position as well.
From the little bit that I've experienced it and know of people who operate in it, one of the other things too is the client wants you there, but they don't want you there. And if you're balance. if you're trying to get into it because you're going to be rubbing shoulders with then you're in it for the wrong reason.
Yeah, exactly. Like it is a fine line of like, I have a good relationship with the clients, but I'm also trying not to be too comfortable to where, a lot of people get, I guess, discouraged or like, hey, why? Like, I thought we were bros, like, right. It's like, we're not bros. Like I'm working for you. Right. Yeah. And so, that's definitely a fine line, but also look at the company as in, is there progress in the company? Meaning not just like, are we taking on new clients, but in the career ladder, right? So is this job that I'm doing is EP work? Is it just temporary? Or if I stay here, will my career just be, I'm going to do EP work till the day I die. Right. And that's not where I see myself. I don't see myself as like being somebody that's just going to do EP work forever. I have other ambitions that I plan on doing, but in the company, at least having a career ladder that allows you to be an EP, to be a team leader, to be a regional manager, to be the head of operations, right? Like if there's not a career path in that, then maybe it might not be a good place for you.
Have you been sullied enough in having been a business owner that the idea of getting back into your own company is way back in your thought process, or is it still something you think about frequently?
I think about it every day. I think because the one thing I loved about being a business owner is having that freedom to make choices, right? What I love about DSG is I have freedom too, because I have freedom over my schedule. I have freedom. And that's another thing people to look for, right? If that's important to you. Some people like having a very structured, like I work Monday through Friday, or I work whatever my days are. I could pick and choose. Some weeks I'm working Monday and Thursday. Some weeks I don't work at all. Some weeks I'm working weeks at a time, right? Like I get to choose that. But for me, being a business owner, I liked it because I could control which direction the business is going. Where if I'm like, you know what, I don't like what we're doing here, I'm going to try to pivot, or I want to pivot it, right? So I'm looking at ways, but instead of looking at what do I like to do, I look at, okay, what are problems? Because if I look at what are problems in the world, then I can figure out what are some solutions and how can I provide a solution to that problem, right? But what that's ultimately ended up doing is it's actually making me lean more towards politics. As my daughter's been getting more involved and I'm looking more into it and I'm getting more involved in my local community, and I start thinking about how, man, I've been doing all this stuff overseas and helping overseas. How can I make an impact in my own place where I live, in my own home where I live? So that's kind of, I've been hinting at it a lot online of just like giving my opinions, openly voicing my opinions about it. But also, I look at that like, do I want to run a business and make a difference? Or do I want to get into public office and make a difference? And I think with my background of not caring so much about how much money I'm going to make and all this, and my drive in life has always been about serving others. I think that is more where I'm driven at, rather than being on the business side of how can I solve a problem? I'm going to probably end up being in the nonprofit space again, because that's how I look at solving something. I don't look at solving something as like, how can I become a billionaire? How can I, just kick my feet up and not work the rest of my life?
Oddly enough, being that we're in that cycle right now, heading into the elections.
Yeah.
Not that I've been seeking out people who are politicians. Mm-hmm. I've had some recent guests who come from the veteran and first responder space who, like you, got to a point where, man, I'm looking around and nobody else is stepping up to address the situation. And they've kind of been brought to the table just because it's their continuation of service. Mm-hmm. So I could definitely see that in you, in that, hey, I see an issue. I want to be a voice in this. How can I be more of a voice?
One of the things I just really bugged me about my time in the military was when there'd be a leader that was not as competent or as intelligent as and I don't want to sound like a narcissist, but I'd say like, that guy's not making a very solid decision based off of the facts we know. He's making a very irrational choice. yet he's in this position and we just have to deal with that, right? I can't create a mutiny and just oust them and then be like, all right, guys, like now we're in charge. Like we just have to like go along with those terrible policies that they create for the meantime, right? I mean, we could 1776 them and, you know, do that, but that it probably just is that worth it?
It's
right?
it's the old adage of, do you want to win the war? Do you want to win that battle?
Exactly. And so, but I look at that now and I look at like, sometimes I'll see things about some of our local leaders, or leaders in California and even on the federal side. And I think, how did this person get elected? How is it that this person isn't that competent? They're not that intelligent. And I'm not to say that I'm the most competent person or the most intelligent person. And I've definitely had a lack in judgment because I've made a ton of mistakes. And we've talked about those, right? Like from my childhood to my military career to even in business, made terrible mistakes. But I could also say, I don't think I'd be that incompetent as some of these folks. And I said, if that person could do that, if that person could be in that leadership role and they're making this big of an impact on their community, even a negative one, they're doing it. I could do that, but make a positive one. I could do that and help people that to me, it dumbfounds me that like, I think most Americans feel this way. We have 365 million people in this country, and the two choices that we have are President Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, right? and I'd say like I'm supporting Trump, right? But that's not to say like I'm not going to critique him on things that I feel are wrong about him, or things that I feel like he needs to be held accountable for. I can't say that. But for some reason, some people get really bent out of shape when you say like, you know, no, you can't critique this person, one or the other, right? And I feel like out of all the people that we have, it just blows my mind that we don't have more competent people wanting to be in politics. And I think a big part of it is because people don't want to be dealing with that stress. Because it doesn't matter how good you are as a person, you're going to get like, the media is going to destroy you. But I like to poke fun at myself. And I thought about that. I was like, you know what? Like, do I really want my dirty laundry hung out? Do I really want all the skeletons in my closet to be like thrown out there for the world to see? It's like, you know what? If I am willing to put on a wig and a dress to pretend to be Deb for like a dumb marketing video to sell skateboards, I don't give a crap about that. I don't give a crap what people think about me if they think I'm a friggin' weirdo, or if they, you know, they say like, oh, how can you do this? Like you had an affair on your wife this many years ago, or you did meth as a kid, or you stole this and whatever, right? Like I'm not going to let those past mistakes hold me back from knowing that I can make a significant impact in the future.
Unfortunately, it's almost one of those things where you'd almost start every single speech you made with, I did this, now let's move on, you know, and just take that ammunition away. But one of the things in talking to one of my guests who ran for a congressional seat, that when you get behind the curtain and you really kind of start seeing how the sausage is made and you really start seeing the business of politics, that he pointed out is it's not just the donkey side, the elephant side. It's once you get into whatever side you're on, it's the politics within that group. And if you're not in the in crowd, well, then the money's not going to go to you. It's going to go to the other. It's just, I think the thing that turns, and I'm putting my spin on it, what turns people off about politics is the business of it. And when we look at, wait a minute, we're 365 million people, and these are the best two options we could come up with as a country, you know, it just.
Yeah. And it's true. People have to endure, and they say, you know, you're in it long enough, you end up becoming the villain yourself. And I think in some way that's true. And in other ways, like I love what Tulsi Gabbard talks about, you know, in her book of why she left the Democratic Party, for love of country. That's her new book. It's not like she's like paying me to say this or anything, but I read that book and I really related to it because she talks about her first couple days of after being elected, and she goes, she goes to work, and she's walking up, and she sees the security guards like at the Capitol, right? And she's like, "Hey, everybody, good morning," whatever. And they tell her, they say, "Well, yeah, we'll see how you feel in a couple months or in a year from now," you know. And she's like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, "Oh, you won't say good morning to us anymore because you're going to be in your elite group and you're not going to give a crap about us anymore." And she provides this example of how she was talking with the security guard, and she's kind of hiding behind the door, and this other congressman walks by, and they're like, "Oh, good morning, sir." Like, and they don't see Tulsi, and the guy just ignores and just keeps going. And he's like, "See what I mean?" Right. And she talks about how people forget who they are when they get into politics. They get wrapped up into this elite group. And in a way, like, I remember that way in the special operations community. I didn't come straight off the street into MARSOC, right? I don't have this like prima donna attitude towards people that aren't MARSOC. I could look at the admin guy or the logistics guy or the motor T guy or whatever, and I'll treat them exactly the same. But there's some folks in the soft community that look at, you know, the enablers or the support people, and they look at them as like below them, like, huh, "You pogues, like you're just a whatever." I don't, because I know without them,
Nothing's getting done.
nothing's getting done. Like all the things that we need. And I had this good relationship with all these folks when I was in the special operations community, when I was on the teams. I had a great relationship with the admin section and with the comm section and with the logistics section. And I remember them telling me, they're like, "You're like one of the few operators that actually treats us well." Right. And it kind of like pissed me off a little bit, because I was like, man, how can these people think that they're so much better than these guys just because it's like, "Oh yeah, we could run longer, and yeah, we went through this mental toughness training." Like, who cares? Like, we chose to do that. They're choosing to do their job, and we need their job, right? And like, they're doing it exceptionally well. I'd say I loved our support guys at MARSOC. I thought they were awesome. I can't say the same thing for a lot of the other units. Right? Like some of the other units I was with, I was like, man, these guys suck. But like for the guys that supported us, I think they were absolutely outstanding. And I felt like that difference in just like how people's attitudes are, I want to bring that same attitude into politics as well, to where it's like, I look at everyday Americans. I know what it's like to struggle as a business owner, to struggle as a veteran. I don't want to say struggle, to battle these things, right? And to deal with these things. And I never want to get to a point where I'm like, "Oh, I'm looking down on you." I want to always be relating to you.
I guess what we're hearing then is Benjie's going to be running for political office here pretty soon.
Yeah, I'd like to, you know, but I'm just being cautious right now. I'm being very slow in my approach, because I want to ensure that where I'm going is where I'm best suited. I don't want to just jump into something like, "Oh, I need to be in Congress, or I need to be in the Senate, or in city council for the school board or something," right? I don't want to just pick one just because I see the slots open. I want to go where I'm best needed, right? Like, these are my skills. This is what I bring to the table. I need to be suited here.
We've never had a Benjie as president.
Never had a Benjie. No.
But from the little bit that I've had the opportunity to get to know you, I think one of the things, and I really honestly believe why I feel a connection with us, is we aren't the ones who came from privilege. I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of people that go towards politics because they've just lived this above average, elitist, privilege, whatever you want to call it. And they go into this sense of better than everybody else. And that's what they carry into politics.
Yeah. Yeah. And exactly, where I feel like there's this huge disconnect between like what the regular American person deals with on a regular basis, or it's like, "Hey, if you want to start a business, just start a business." Or if, you know, you need food stamps, like, here's this, right? Like on both sides of the spectrum. Right. And I grew up with my mom on food stamps and having to raise 4 kids on her own. And I know what it's like to be in a struggling family, and then be on the opposite side of being a military family and being relatively successful and being able to own my own home at 24 years old, which is like unheard of today, right? But like I know what it's like to live on both sides of the spectrum, where it's like growing up struggling to, well, later my kids don't realize that they were growing up struggling because I was hiding it very well. But I never reached out for welfare or anything like that because I had too much pride, even though, but what I did have is I did have a great church that came alongside us. But what I will say is that I could empathize with the fact that there are things that we can do as a government that could really help people. And you can't just completely eliminate programs. But at the same time, you can't just completely enable people to be, like I was saying, like professional victims. Because those two opposite sides, right, where you're just like, no help, all the help. Like, I think like what you and I were saying, most people are somewhere in the middle. I mean, I think most of us agree on that. And so I just would love to see more of that implemented rather than the too far extremes.
The only thing I'll say is when you start posting your ads and doing your commercials, don't make some unrealistic, small thread of truth and like, I led troops that took over.
I actually...
Yeah, you led a mission one time. All right, calm down.
Yeah, one thing I'd hope to... I've been wanting to hope to move away from eventually, and I want to do this with Thrash and Raid, is I want people to know me as Benjie. Like, this is Benjie. He's a person. He's a family man. He's all these other things. And oh, by the way, he was also in special operations. And right now, it's been really hard to detach from that because people were like, oh no, like you're Benjie, you're a special operator. Oh, and you just so happen to have a family and you all these other things, right? And so I'd like to get to this point where being a special operator was that chapter in my life. It provided amazing experiences for me and opportunities for me later on. But that's just that chapter. I don't want that to be like Benjie, the special operator, because then what I'll do is I'll be that guy that's like that timeline's fleeting. It's like, remember that? Like, and I'm just I'm wearing the red hat and it's like tilted and I'm hanging around the VFW every day. Yeah, I don't want to do that.
I think that if you do go down that route, you'll be great at it. I think you have the self-introspection to really realize the importance of putting Benjie first, in the sense of, I'm going to show you me as Benjie. Oh, and that's, like you said, that's just something that I did. If somebody has a question, it'll be more than happy. Like, yeah, I'll answer your question, but you're not going to lead with that. And I think that that's what we need as a country, is more people just willing to stand up. If I could have a magic wand, I would just get rid of the political parties. Just stand up and tell me what you are for or against.
Yeah.
Regardless of party affiliation. But unfortunately, when you sign on the dotted line to a particular party, that's what you have to subscribe to.
And I think that's why a lot of people relate so well with President Trump. Whether you love him or hate him, I think a lot of people realize like he's not a politician, and some people are like, they hate that about them because they're like, he's not political. Or not very, I don't know.
He doesn't play the game well.
He doesn't. He's not. And so he's not very diplomatic. And so, but I think people could relate to that because he talks like, just like some arrogant dude that right? Like your uncle that's just always just like going up at the dinner table.
Oh,
like,
shit, he said that again.
Yeah, like you're like, dang it, Uncle Joe. Like, what are you doing? Yeah, so, but
at the same token, you're sitting there going, Thanksgiving's always going to be fun.
Yeah, he's making a good point, But, but it's, he is funny. Love him or hate him. I remember there's things that I would say like, I don't like this about Trump and I agree with certain things about his policies, but he is funny. He's a funny guy. Like, he cracks me up. But I think, yeah, people just don't relate to a lot of politicians anymore because it's like there's like this mask, like this fakeness, and you could tell when someone is just coming up with some like elaborate way to like beat around the bush to answer a question. you know, on both sides. I'm not saying, I'm not just saying like on, you know, on the left, but even on the right, like people just, you're like, dude, just answer the question directly, man.
It's called being a politician.
It sucks.
I go back to it. It's a game and it's a business. And if you can look beyond that, and I'm not saying you specifically, but if you look beyond that and realize it's a business and they have an agenda and an objective, regardless of the side. And it's not always, is it, I think the worst part for me is you hear the stories of the people who came into it with the best of intentions, but then the business just takes over, you know, and I don't know how you fight. I don't know how you be that salmon fighting upstream against that.
Yeah, I know it's hard. And there's a guy running for Congress right now in the 39th district. His name's David Serpa. I spoke with him and he had talked about how he wishes there was more of a coalition of guys, or not guys and gals, right? Of like folks that believe in what they believe. And instead of competing against one another, like you could be part of the same party, but they're like competing against one another. And I see, you know, guys in the next districts over, right? You got Daryl Issa, you got Ken Calvert. And then it's like, why aren't they aligning with each other and campaigning alongside each other, where it's like, yeah, they might be in different districts, but you're part of the same party and you're part of the same area in Southern California. You should probably like help one another out, promote another, and, you know, build a coalition with one another, rather than being like, no, I'm my own separate thing. Like these, their own separate thing. And I just think if you had a really good group of guys, there's so many veterans out there, guys and gals that are smart, capable, and have the passion to want to serve and help people. Those people we need to come together and like take this on, because all these people that are getting into office right now, not saying all of them, but a big number of these people that are out there because they're in it for themselves and not the people, they're going to be the ones that get into that position and do exactly what Tulsi Gabbard said she hated about it, is they're going to look down on the people. Like we need real people that could relate, want to serve, and do it for the right reasons.
And using Tulsi Gabbard as a perfect example, on the surface, it appears she is driven by her core values and what is important to her. And if part of that was jumping ship and going from one political party to another because she didn't believe in the mission, that shows a little bit more of her as a person saying, I've got these convictions. I was a Democrat who went, you know what, we're not going in the right path. I'm going to switch over here to the Republican side. But really, that goes back to, if we could just get rid of the political parties, there wouldn't be this need to raise my hand and say, I'm now over here. No. Hey, guys, I don't like how our group is operating. Let's bring it back to the center, or let's work together.
Yeah. It's really sad, because it's like, what I've noticed about, it doesn't matter whether it's politics or business or anything. It's like there's all these, everyone gets the headline of what's going on, or everyone
never reads beyond the headline.
And we dealt with the same thing in the military too, and you see the same thing in business. You know, there's some initiative going out, and you just see you flash that on there, but you know, once you get into the details, you're like, hey, this kind of doesn't really make sense, right? And so I just wish that there was more focus from people. And this is just, I don't know how to solve this right now. It's just an issue today with how we gain information. It's coming at us at a very rapid pace. So our I guess attention span is so minuscule, to where if like I learned this in marketing with Later Skater, if you don't change the screen on like what someone's viewing, like the angle, or flash to a different part of the scene, or, you know, change the camera, whatever, every second people lose interest. Like if you show the same shot and someone's just talking for like more than a couple seconds, they're like, that bored, and they just flip it.
So that's why my reels don't do well.
But it's crazy, because we could film something that we're like, oh man, spent all this time doing, and then we're like, oh wow, it didn't do well because
it was a stagnant shot.
That hook in the beginning just didn't grasp someone right away. And so you could film this really funny thing, or this really amazing piece of information, but no one gets it because people's attention span is so short. And that's why people read only the headlines. And that's why Twitter and X is so popular, because it's like these one little boop, like you don't have to read this whole thing. It's just everyone just throws out just some simple thing, and that's it.
I do appreciate your time. Anything else you want to hit before we close this out? Last piece of advice, anything at all?
You know, we kind of bounce around from like a lot of different things and about like the business and where I'm at today and all that stuff. And for those that don't know who I am, I'd say like go back and watch the first episode, and you'd see the total difference in you know, where my thought process was in my business of like, I wanted Thrash Raider to change the world. And I was like, I just want to be that company that's different than others that are helping people. And then to today where I'm like, that was a mistake. What I want people to understand that are transitioning out of military service or first responder service, I want people to understand that you don't have to have it all figured out immediately. And I actually think it's a great thing, a wonderful thing when people get out and try things. And the beauty of it is you could try something and be like, hey, I don't like that. And you could move on to something else. And I actually really encourage people to try as many options as you can, you know, because even things that you might not think you might like, just try it, right? Or just find as much information as you can about it, because there were things that like I never thought I would want to be in executive protection. I was like, I want to be as far removed from that as possible. I think it's a very rewarding thing that I do. It's temporary right now. I don't plan on doing it for the rest of my life, but for the time being, it's been wonderful and it's provided a lot of opportunities. So that's what I encourage people to do, is try new things. Don't think you have to figure it out or have like you spent 20 years or 30 years in one career that you need to find the exact perfect thing that you could spend another 20 years doing. You could bounce around 20 times in 1 year, and that's great because you have the opportunity to.
Again, I appreciate you sharing your time with me. All the best going forward.
Thank you.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.